Thank you, Tom. So it's 9:31. So I'm going to ask our fearless president, Ron Gibbs, who I'm looking for right now to pin. We're going to welcome everyone. Can everyone see us?
Yes.
Excellent. My name is Courtney Spikes. I am the Vice President of the California Map Society. Delighted to have everyone here. I know we're going to be admitting more people as they come in. Emily, if I could ask you to just keep an eye on the admits. I know Tom made you co-host and help me let everyone in who comes along the way. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over right now to Ronald Gibbs, who is our fearless president of many years now, who was instrumental in actually helping us find many of our speakers today, along with Tom Paper, our other vice president, who is graciously hosting us on his wonderful Zoom meeting. Thank you, Tom. And I will turn it over to Ron right now.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people who are joining us from at least 2 continents. So that's wonderful. Thank you, fearless Vice President Courtney Spikes, and a very personal and warm welcome to all. This is a meeting occurring in winter, but it is actually officially our fall 2023 meeting. So Courtney's lined up a great meeting, and I want to extend very personal thanks to Bob Headland, in from the UK. Bob and I met about 2 months ago on the deck of a ship in the Antarctic waters. And it cost me, I think, a coffee to get Bob to agree when he returned from his long voyages in Antarctic to join us. So we're really very much looking forward to that. And Suzanne Connect, who will be joining us for the 11 o'clock lecture, became a new friend also when we met at a wedding last summer, and I learned about her fantastic journey and map interests. Just a word for your calendars. The spring meeting will be Saturday, June the 29th. It's going to be a hybrid meeting at the Rumsey Map Center at the campus. Evan is there, and we'll be holding the meeting there. The theme of the meeting will be early Americana, and we'll have a lot of information, but mark your calendars. It'll be a full day meeting. So I'll turn the microphone back to, Tom, yes?
Well, can I get a word in here at some point?
Yeah,
Courtney,
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to just say thank you to our board members. I wanted to mention all of our board members. It'll take me just a minute. John Fleming, Ken Habib, Juliet, Fred Desjardins, Emily Yang, and our past president, John Jablonski. Thank you to all of you for your for supporting this love affair we have with maps and art and science and history. And did I get everybody, Ron?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then I also want to mention Calafia. I have a copy here, the wonderful publication of the California Map Society. I encourage you to share this with friends and get them to join the Map Society, because membership in the Map Society gets you these 2 lovely issues every twice a year. And Fred Desjardins and Juliet Rothman have been laboring on this for, is it 10 years, Fred? And we greatly appreciate all of your service. And I know that someone named Eleanor Bigelow will be joining the team as an editor later this year. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is our advertisers. Fred, tell me if I get this right. Old World Auctions, PBA Galleries, New World Maps, Pixium, Washington Map Society, Original Antique Maps, Spillman Fine Books, Carto Historica, Curtiss Wright Maps, and Neatline Maps. So we thank them very much for their support of the magazine. And I think that's it.
Fred, when will the next issue be in the mail?
Late March.
Okay.
And Barry Ruderman, right? Is he going to be an advertiser?
Yes, I wanted to mention that Barry's team is putting together a full page ad, and that will appear. I've got a spot reserved for them on the upcoming issue. So we really welcome Barry back to Calapia.
Okay, Courtney, take it away. We've got 40 on the line now. Courtney, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I'm dealing with all the technical stuff behind the scenes too. Well, Tom, thank you for saying most of the stuff I was going to say. So
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
So welcome everybody. Thanks to everyone. Thank you to all the board members. Thank you to Calafia. If you are joining us today and you are not yet a member of the California Map Society, we encourage you to join us. Part of your membership gets you 2 issues of this incredible award-winning magazine. And as Tom pointed out, beautifully created and managed and published by Fred Dargelet and Juliet Rothman. And soon Eleanor Bigelow will be very much involved with that as well. We're excited to see that. And so I'm going to now share my screen. Give me 1 second to just review today's event. We have Evan Thornberry from the David Rumsey Map Center, who's going to give us an overview and update of what's going on there. Then we have our 3 speakers, Robert Hedlund talking about the non-existent islands of the Southern Ocean. We'll have a quick break and then come back to hear Suzanne Connect talk about Night Watch, part of her memoirs and experiences of circumnavigating the globe in a sailboat. And then we'll close with Chet Van Duzer talking about imagined territories around the South Pole and looking at some older maps and globes as well. So we have some wonderful stuff. It's sort of a nautical theme for the conference today. So we're very excited to see all these different ways of looking in. I am now going to stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to, I'm going to do a quick introduction of Evan Thornberry. Hold on, let me stop my share. And now I've got to stop this and I need to find Evan. Hello, Evan. Let me find you. A pin. Hi. Okay, great. Thank you. So Evan Thornberry is, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, is the new head and curator of the David Rumsey Map Center at Stanford Libraries, an incredible position. And we're all excited, Evan, that you're there. He has a wealth of experience in historical cartography and geospatial information. He joined Stanford from the University of British Columbia Library, where he served as the Geographic Information Systems librarian and played a crucial role in supporting teaching, learning, and research with geospatial information and cartographic materials. Before that, Evan managed an impressive collection of approximately 200,000 historical maps, 5,000 atlases dating back as far as 1482 at a place we all know and love, the Norman B. Leventhal Map Center at the Boston Public Library. Evans also established himself as an expert collaborator in the field with many publications and presentations on web mapping and digital collections, and his active involvement in the Geo4LibCamp community has been invaluable. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much for that great introduction. I am just going to set up my screen here really quick. Sharing sound. All right. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm not going to go on to introduce myself, but I will just kind of let you know a little bit about my short presentation today. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to sort of introduce the Map Center for anybody who has not been already acquainted with the Map Center, a brief introduction about myself again and the rest of our staff at the center. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's coming up on our calendar. So some news and updates. If you have a pen and paper, be ready to jot some dates down. I've also got some QR codes where you can find some more information or subscribe to our newsletter. So if you have your phone and you want to take a photo of the QR codes, have those ready as well. And I think we'll have some time for some Q&A after my presentation. So great. Well, for those of you who are not familiar with the David Rumsey Map Center, we are a unit within Stanford Libraries. We take care of the historical cartographic collections there. And so we work quite a lot with other units at the library to curate and maintain those collections and collaborate on projects that we feel will help advance education, foster learning, and support research through the use of historical, spatial, and cartographic data. We have a very close partnership with David Rumsey, as you probably all know. David is he's a very close collaborator, and we get to see him quite often. And he is, of course, instrumental in helping build the collections and support all of our services and resources. So we definitely wouldn't be able to do it without him. So this is a screenshot of our website. This is our staff. We are a small staff. There's 5 of us total. One of them is full-time, part-time. So 4 full-time staff members. We do quite a lot with our staffing resources. Christina Larson is our rare map librarian. Some of you may know Christina if you've been in for tours or have done any sort of programming or participated in conferences at the Map Center. Christina usually leads a lot of classes and tours. I work really closely with Christina to build collections and just make sure that we are serving the patrons that we ought to be serving. Laura Swenson, who is out on leave right now, she is our center services supervisor, and she is really sort of, along with Niles Dorn, our center services support specialists, are kind of the glue that bind the Map Center together. They do a lot of calendar work, scheduling programs. They write our newsletter, which will come out very soon, and just really help with all of the fine details and logistics of all the work that we do. And Laura Kruger, of course, she is our, it says librarian 1 there, but her actual title is cartographic metadata librarian. So Laura is really involved with the collections aspect of our work. Whenever we receive donations or acquire material, she's the one who describes that material so that it can be found and used online. And then myself, so as Courtney mentioned, I'm pretty new. I've been there since October. That's less than a half year along, even though it seems like a very long time.
Do you want it on your phone or do you want it on the computer?
Oh, it sounds like
I'm
there we go. Okay.
Sorry about that, Evan.
No problem. I was actually going to say, I forgot to mention this at the very beginning. I am on a small laptop here, so please do interrupt if you have questions. I won't be able to see everybody, so feel free to interrupt. I'll be mindful of any comments that people might have or questions throughout the presentation. So I've been there, pretty new. Before I moved down to Stanford, I was at the University of British Columbia Library in Vancouver, where I was the Geographic Information Systems librarian, and I worked. It was a very different job, working mainly with faculty and students around creating cartographic content, building web maps, building applications, spatial analysis questions, which I think I really love that sort of work. I missed, when I was at UBC, I missed the historical map collections that I was involved with at the Leventhal Map Center. So I felt like David Rumsey Map Center position is like the perfect combination of all of those things. And so I'm really happy to be at Stanford and working with all of the wonderful, the dream team, really, staff at the Map Center. So I'm very lucky. Let's see here. Okay, so here is our first QR code. This is a QR code to our newsletter. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the events that we have coming up on the calendar. And you can either take a photo of that, scan that QR code, which will take you to our newsletter subscription, or you can use that bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/drmc-news. And I'm going to show this at the end too, just in case you're not ready. But let's go through some of the things that are on the calendar. So first off, you'll probably all be happy to know our California Map Society and David Rumsey Map Center student exhibition competition has been launched. We have a call for proposals out. We have been promoting this in our newsletter, and we've got flyers. We've been emailing folks, and it'll actually go out in our next newsletter as well, because there's a little bit of time. If you do know any students or anybody who might know students that might be interested in proposing an exhibition in the David Rumsey Map Center space, please do make them aware of this competition. Again, the best place to stay informed is the newsletter, but if you have any questions about where you find more information about this student competition, you can always email the center, or we have a link for an informational page online. But proposals are due on April 12th, so there's still a little bit of time. On that note, our current winner, Mohammed Daffer, is scheduled. We are actually meeting with Mohammed next week to go over a timeline for his exhibition, which is titled "Charting the Rubble, Devastation, and Rebuilding from Disasters." So this will be installed later this year in September, and we're really excited about that. So be on the lookout for more announcements and timing for when that exhibition will be installed. So this is actually, hold on one second. My audio is playing. My video is playing in the background, but I'll start this over again here in a second. But this is, so we're planning an 8th anniversary celebration of the David Rumsey Map Center on Monday, April 1st, 2024, from 4:30 to about 7 o'clock. And we're still planning this, but we do know the general program. David will be there, as well as Andrea Gatopoulos, who is the film director for David's movie called A Stranger Quest. Has anybody heard of this movie at all yet? I don't know if this is new to you, but it's been kind of the hubbub at the Map Center. There is a movie about David Rumsey, and we are going to screen it at the 8th anniversary in the Hawk Auditorium in the Tradle building, which is next door to Green Library on campus. We started this at 4:30 so that folks can come from off campus and park for free. Free parking on campus after 4, which I didn't know about until recently. So hot tip if you want to visit. We are going to show the movie, which is about David Rumsey and his life of collecting and providing maps online. I have not seen the movie. It was filmed, or it was screened at Torino last November. So this will be the 3rd screening of the movie. The week before this event, it will be screened at the Ann Arbor Film Festival. So,
Evan, what time will the movie start?
The movie will start probably about 5 o'clock. There are going to be some introductions first by myself, Mike Keller, the university librarian, David, and then Andrea. And we'll watch the movie, and then afterward there will be some Q&A, and we'll move into the pavilion space in the same building to have a catered sort of social time. And Andrea will actually be available to kind of introduce a book, which is my next slide. And he'll be giving away a book about it's kind of a reflection on his experience working with David, but it also ties into one of his other passions, which is maps and video games, the short history of maps and video games. So I have actually, before that slide, I have one slide, which is the trailer for this movie. I realize that it's already 9:50, and I know I'm not gonna eat into Robert's presentation, but I do want to show this trailer because it gives you kind of a glimpse into what sort of movie this is. So anyway, I'll be quiet.
And I've also put in a link to the chat about this movie that's hosted at the Rumsey Center for everyone.
Thank you. Sorry, was there another question? I'm going to just go back to my slide here and pause it.
Evan, quick question. Will the Map Center be open before the film is showed?
That is a really good question. So we are going to change our open hours, and at that point in time, we won't technically be scheduled to be open for public drop-in, but we're always open for appointments. So you're welcome to reach out and we can schedule a time to be open. But did you have something
Well,
particularly in mind?
you know, if I'm going to drive to Stanford, I'd like to do it for a day, for,
Yes.
for the duration.
We can connect after this. How's that? And then we can try to find, we may end up just opening extra hours that day anyway, just because of the event. But
I would do that.
yeah, let's connect about that for sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I will be quiet. Here is the movie trailer. And it does start very quietly, so don't turn up your
Hello, David.
audio.
I'm your navigator. I wanted to know if you would take me with you on a trip. It's not so much for the sake of exploration. It's because I have so many questions that escape my logic. Such as why humans always seem to look back at childhood even when they're running towards the furthest future. Or how they can fall in love so deeply with things nobody cares about, and make it their life mission. Or what death is, and how does it feel to have it inching closer and closer? And what is your quest, David? That is the strangest question to me. That is a question I really can't answer. And that is why I really, really need to go.
Awesome.
Great. Yes, I know it's very mysterious. And I can't wait to see it. I really am looking forward to this. I've probably watched that trailer over and over, maybe 15 times already. So I'm really excited. All right. So moving on, in May, I'm sorry, no, we're in April, still in April 2nd. So this is the day after the presentation or the movie. Andrea Gatopoulos, who is the film director, is going to present a talk that explores the evolution of maps in video games, as I mentioned, and as a continuation of humanity's fascination of the unknown, symbolized historically by the Pillars of Hercules. So this is going to be another sort of a book. You know, the book will be involved as well. He'll be there to, I think he's giving away books for this event as well. So so definitely, hopefully you can make it. I know it's a commitment to come 2 days in a row, and this one being on a Tuesday. You know what? Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Monday, Ken, you asked about Monday. We will be open. Actually, don't quote me on that. I'm gonna come back to our open hours here in a second. Ken, forget I said this. We will touch bases. This Beyond the Pillars of Hercules presentation is going to be the day after on Tuesday. Monday, we will also technically not be open, but we can schedule some time to have people in before the event. So apologies for the confusion there. Okay. So May 15th, jumping to May 15th, in the morning time, we are going to do a virtual site launch of Old Maps Online 4. I don't know if anybody's ever used Old Maps Online before, but Old Maps Online has been around for a while. I used it when I was in grad student, I was just out of grad school, just started working at the Leventhal Map Center. It was a great resource for finding material from libraries all around the world. You could search spatially, using a digital map to uncover maps that geographically overlay or geographically fit your computer screen, basically. So that was a first. This is the fourth iteration of Old Maps Online, and I really don't know all of the features, but it is going to showcase a lot of really cool new features where you can do geographic overlays, and I think annotations as well. So so stay tuned for that. That one will be virtual, so you don't have to make it all the way to the Map Center for this. It'll be all via Zoom. We have a conference coming up. So this is another really exciting one, or a workshop sponsored by Stanford Department of History and the David Rumsey Map Center. Paula Finland will be, is really sort of, she's faculty in Department of History and has really been taking the lead on organizing this. all I know, Chet Van Duzer will be there. Chet, I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person. But there will be a series of presentations and discussions about Urbano Monti's or surrounding Urbano Monti's 1587 world map, which we hold at the Rumsey Map Center. It's a significant artifact reflecting on the global curiosity and cartographic knowledge of the Renaissance period.
Quick question, what
please-
is the time? There's no time on your slide.
I don't have the time for that. So we will find out soon. This being in May will come out in a later newsletter. So once we have that information, we'll make sure that that's available through the newsletter, and of course you'll be able to find a link on our website as well. So speaking of website, we are going to do some improvements on our website. I'm not going to get into too many details about this, but we have already started sort of, as you probably already know, we did a website renovation just before I arrived. Stanford Libraries did sort of a library-wide architecture change of the websites. So we are already sort of generating content that sort of reflects, I think, what our old website may have been, more information about things like exhibitions and conferences and how to access the resources at the Map Center, and just generally more information about us. So that will happen very soon. You'll start to see some changes coming up. We are also doing Friday tours. So this kind of fits into our new hour, our open hours. We are changing when we are open for drop-in, public drop-in. Again, we are always open for research and classes by appointment. So this doesn't mean that we're closed any other times. We are just not open for public drop-in, except for Fridays all day, Wednesday afternoons, and Thursday afternoons. On Fridays, we are going to start doing half-hour tours. So if you would like to come in and have a meaningful experience and meet with some of the staff, we're going to start doing those midway through March at 11 o'clock and at 2 o'clock on Fridays. Okay, so that's pretty much it. This is, again, the QR code for our newsletter. This is where you would find all the information when we have it available. It will come out in our newsletter. We will also do our best to put it up on the web, so you can always go to our website as well. Our website, again, is this is the URL and another QR code for you if you want to just get a quick link to it on your phone. That's it. I want to thank you for having me. This is my first California Map Society meeting. It's really nice to see you all. I know there's a lot of familiar faces and names, and I look forward to seeing you all in person in June.
Thank you, Evan.
So much, Evan. We're so delighted you gave us that update and so many great new things happening at the Rumsey. I'm sure many of us will try to get there if we can. And just, you sent a QR code in terms of learning about the events. Is there something that we could sign up for to get email alerts? Do you have a newsletter that goes out that we should be aware of?
Yeah, the QR code that I went to, so I'll go back a couple of slides. This is where you would go. So this will take you to a page with a form where you fill out your name, your email address, and you submit it. That will put you on that'll automatically subscribe you to our newsletter. And we're going to try to
So if we don't want to use a
Monday.
QR code, Evan?
Oh, yeah. So see this, there's a bit.ly link right there.
Yeah.
If you type that into your browser.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put it into the thing.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Like I said, I'm on a small computer. I don't have all of
No, you're okay. I'm just trying to get sorry, my view is weird.
I'll put it in the chat here after my presentation.
Yeah, put it in the chat. That'd be great.
Okay, cool. Great.
That'd be great, because then people can cut and paste and put it in and sign up. And then that way, if they do that, they'll get email alerts of your upcoming events.
Yep. We're going to try to put them out don't quote me on this. I don't know. This is we've only done a couple of them since I've been there. We're going to try to do every first Monday of the month. That's when you can expect it. Again, we have a small staff and a lot going on. So if we don't have all of the info to put in the newsletter on the first Monday of every month, we will probably put it on the first Tuesday of that month.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh. Love it. So Michael Manini put it on the chat for us as well.
Oh, thank you.
So that's fantastic. And then I think we're good to go. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for
Evan, we're
having me.
delighted. If you could stop your screen share, that would be fantastic. And well done. We're a little short on questions. So if you have questions for Evan, why don't you put them in the chat? And then he could perhaps stay on and answer those in the chat if you have something specific for him. And we're going to transition to our next speaker, the wonderful Bob Headland. I'm going to share my screen first, Bob, just so we can look again at what's happening today. So we just heard from Evan Thornberry. We're now going to Robert Headland. And then after Bob speaks, we'll have a 10-minute break. And then we'll have Susan and Chet afterwards. I just want to say we're so delighted to have Bob Headland here. He's got such a wealth of information and knowledge in the field and area of polar research. Robert Headland has been working in this field since 1977, when he started with the British Antarctic Survey, and a terrific book, The Island of South Georgia, resulted from his involvement in conjunction with the Cambridge University of the United Kingdom. Now, Bob's interests and specializations developed from biogeography to include historical geography of both polar regions. So it's not surprising that the Scott Polar Research Institute at Cambridge appointed Bob its archivist and curator for 27 years, during which time he prepared many important special exhibitions and lectures to commemorate numerous notable historical events. Later, Bob became involved with the Antarctic Heritage Trust, which works to maintain the huts from the early explorations of the Antarctic region. Bob has many, many accomplishments under its belt, so I'll just name a few here. He's a member of the Institute of Historical Research of the University of London. He is a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and he is the former president of the Antarctic Club, plus a recipient of the prestigious Polar Medal. And I also encourage everyone to check out his major publication, A Chronology of Antarctic Exploration. Please give a warm welcome to our next presenter, Bob Headland. Oh, hold on, Bob. I think you're still muted.
Oh, yes.
There we go.
Got away from the microphone. Thank you very much for the introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, I've got quite a bit to cover. So, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, for one of you shipmates, I shall go to the share screen and get on with the lecture. It's an interesting question of speaking about the non-existent islands. I have managed to get slides of a few, but you'll get to know about this in a few moments. And
hey, Bob, do you want to put the microphone on?
I'll put the microphone on and we'll see if this improves.
Thank you, sir.
Pardon me, just a desk load of spaghetti.
We've all been there. This will make it much smoother and easier for everyone to hear your
Now that should
talk.
improve. I'm just waiting for the share screen, which worked the first time on testing. Let's go in and out again while you all curse gently under your breaths.
All is well.
It looks better. Can everyone see what I'm going to talk about?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've still got a slight problem. We had the changing working and now it doesn't appear to be working.
Oh, hey, Bob. Can you hear me?
I'm speaking from Cambridge as you... Oh, that's better.
Bob, can you hear me?
Delay. But
Bob?
you've seen the
Bob,
title.
can you hear me?
And if you look at the rather simple map of Antarctica, the 5th largest continent, and look around it, you'll see there's these little islands marked in red. There's 19 peri-Antarctic islands, all of which do exist. Indeed, I've visited quite a large number of them. The earliest seen was South Georgia, 1675. The last one to genuinely be discovered and appear on the maps was Christmas Day 1902. Now these peri-Antarctic islands are one aspect. Here's the same map with a number of other islands in red, one very large one, New South Greenland, and the others are the non-existent islands, all of which have appeared in Admiralty and other official charts. If I put them both together, there's a more useful map for you to see. The red ones do not exist, and the green ones are perfectly reliable. There's about the same number as you go around the Southern Ocean and the extreme southern parts of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean. That should sort the geography out. There's all sorts of things. The earliest non-existent island was seen by Francis Drake, who claims to have landed there. The most recent one by a Norwegian whaler, Trollsklippen, which, as I'll explain later, I think is essentially an iceberg. And with that sketch the captain made, you can see there's pack ice all around it. Well, there's a bit of reason for this. I'll explain in a few moments. The islands and rocks, there's a list of them. And the Society has a A4 page with a map and giving the basic details of all of them. And it's roughly along these lines that I propose to describe them, with whatever information for each one we specifically have. Now, the origin and stories about them. Many, I think, are quite reasonably icebergs, especially the large tabular icebergs that break off the coasts of Antarctica, various ice shelves and so forth. At the moment, A23A is drifting round the northern parts of the Weddell Sea, the largest lump of ice at present on Earth, but by no means the largest. There's been other ones. The thick pack ice, especially if it's rafting on itself, can have strange formation shapes, not the sort of thing one would normally expect from ice, and combine the icebergs with pack and some morainic debris from rocks and things fallen on it, and if they've overturned, things they've picked up from the seabed. You're in the polar regions, so you expect poor visibility. The daylight is very unevenly distributed. Distances are difficult to estimate. There's nothing you might know from reasonable comparative sides of things. I've added poor navigation, especially in the early days. With a few of the islands around, you were sometimes in circumstances where the captain didn't know where he was, so you might have a real island in the wrong place. Some flotsam around, that can get the wrong impression, especially if, for instance, there's birds over it. One of the best examples of this was Roald Amundsen aboard Fram on the expedition which eventually reached the South Pole. Near the Ross Sea, he found what looked like an island with vast amounts of birds round it. Changed course to inspect it, well, an island or a rock. He gave it a name, Dead Whale Island, which gives you an idea of what it really was. Volcanoes, small isolated volcanoes, causing islands to appear, and in a few instances obliterating them also. With some of the sealers, and I mentioned this a little bit later, there was an amount that looks very much like deliberate deception. And we all know when dealing with old charts, transcription errors occur. Some of these things, volcanic and others, ephemeral phenomena. With very cold air, its density is much greater than the average atmospheric density, so refraction is stronger. Mirage can move things considerable distances. Weather's amazing. Deceptive clouds, plenty of those. The idea of lost ships has been speculated, but I don't think it's a major one. When one of these islands has appeared on a chart, you've got the concept of expectant attention, which in many aspects can cause things to be corroborated. Captains caution if they saw something in a distance, especially in the sailing days, it was best avoided rather than go close. So on the side of caution, many of them were sighted but only at a distance. Presence of birds and seals around them makes them look more convincing. You see, I've added rum. There's more than one sailor's story due to that. And the question marks, there's more than just those few ideas of them. If you look around at those on the various lists and charts, about 50% have never existed. Doubtful but later confirmed. They'd redeemed themselves. The navigation was wrong, but they did exist. And the volcanics, they were ephemeral phenomena. There's about 4 of those. If you add the statistics up, you'll find it doesn't equal 100%, but what do you expect with this subject? The tests, when islands have been reported. The reliability of observers. Some were better navigators, better known than others. Measuring the bathymetry where practical. Not always easy where there's ice. If you've got several 1,000 meters down, it's unlikely there's an island. Circumnavigation to get it from all sides was something many of the navigators tried. Remember, we're going back centuries in some cases. Of course, landing on it's good, and with all these things, the more corroboration the better, although some entirely non-existent islands have been corroborated. The volcanoes. There's quite an amount round there. Deception Island in the South Shetland Islands, established in its huge caldera, a completely new island in 1967, but it only lasted about half a dozen years. It was basically pumice, so it was washed and floated away. And Montague Island in the South Sandwich Islands, that's a photograph with a vast amount of steam coming from its summit. Earlier on, but before we were able to get that slide, there was red visible there. They're fairly active. And they can create and destroy islands. I rather like this one with the South Sandwich Islands, a little to the east of South Georgia, and just north of the Antarctic Treaty limits. Protector Shoal, discovered by HMS Protector, was oozing an amount of pumice floating on the surface. That's only 27 meters deep. That might be, well, South Sandwich Islands are a chain of 11 volcanoes. That could be number 12. Bottom left, Vysokaya Bank, only 84 meters deep. Comes up quickly. That was found by a Russian whaling expedition many years ago, as you can gather by the name. You'll notice also the one seen by a recent oceanic swathe from the polar vessel, Polarstern. That was discovered rather unexpectedly and gives you an idea there might well be a volcano on its way to doing something. Another good volcanic example is Heard Island. It's a pity there was a wire that I hadn't noticed going across the bridge when I took the photograph, but that's fairly active. It was in quite violent eruption in 2002, and the not-so-good bottom photograph had a bit of cloud, and the lava tubes coming down, occasionally breaking out red hot, were on the ice sheet, which was rather spectacular, to say the least. Now, this is an interesting example of a volcanically quite active area. There's the McDonald Islands, just to the west of Heard Island. The first landing on those and first exploration was the 27th of January 1971. And if you look at the image on the left, you'll see the first exploration of another place wasn't only just a little earlier, which gives you an idea of the remoteness of the McDonald Islands. HMS Challenger mapped them roughly in 1873, and they still look like that, as you can see in the bottom left. The Australian National Antarctic Research Expeditions have this map with the yellow on top of it, showing the position of them in 2002. With the old position there, you can see they're increasing enormously. Those are quite active. They've always been present from their discovery. But look in the vicinity. Bottom right, you can see Heard Island, and just to its west, the McDonald Islands. In the top, roughly central, the French Kerguelen Island. Look between them, the bathymetry. You've got 92, 190 meters, and 12 meters. In that volcanic zone, there's possibly a non-existent island, could be inexistent. That's a fairly active region. The historical side. Here's a chart from 1780. And this is a very good example, if I enlarge the section south of Africa, of some islands where they're existent, perfectly straightforward. The descriptions of Darien and Mersevin fit very accurately that of the Prince Edward Islands, and likewise Diego Averes and Gough. Descriptions, it's roughly the same island. This is a case of the captain didn't know where he was or got his latitudes and longitudes right, which in the late 1700s is hardly surprising. So there are some that appeared on maps, but did redeem themselves. In the Southern Ocean, many voyages went far south, especially before Suez and Panama opened. They were either going round Cape Gallus or Cape Horn, and in the 1850s and especially in the 1890s, vast amounts of ice appeared. Here's something the artist might have slightly over-dramatized it, but some of these ice islands, as they term them, actually icebergs, did get reported on charts, and you can see a very spectacular one. George Thompson is about to have something crash onto her jet deck from the look of it. Recently, B-15 broke off in the Ross Ice Shelf and was marauding round in the Ross Sea. There's the end of the Dragowski ice tongue, one of the largest ice tongues ever, just been knocked off by it. And it was a hazard to navigation, but that was satellite ages, so its nature and position accurately determined. Trängsholmen, if you look at this, it's a question of what it might be. That is actually quite a large rock in the pack ice off Pendenfertisch Island, that's in the Bellingshausen Sea, just to the west of the Antarctic Peninsula. And in its vicinity, I photographed this combination. Proper iceberg at the back, island in the front, or rock at least, you might report so. No, it's a bit of an adjoining iceberg in shallow water has scraped along the bottom, turned upside down, and has sediment all over it. That's probably one of the best bits of confusion I know. The idea of the cliffs and ice with poor visibility. If you can't see very much around, you might see that. If you can see it properly, it's just that ice flow. So some of these where you have effective observations of something large is actually something very small. But the whole idea of what you can see at a distance. Well, I've known a case of someone seeing a sledge in a distance and walking a short way towards it and finding it was a crushed matchbox lying on the glacial surface. Captain Scott had the idea of this being a ship, the Belle Isle. There's his description of it, noting later that it was ice. So all sorts of ideas when you've got little perception are around. I mentioned the question of mirages. There's some I photographed off the United States station, McMurdo on Ross Island, where you've got islands up in the clouds, hazard to aviation. Edward Wilson doing the same thing, had mirages at sunset in areas where there's virtually nothing beyond the curvature of the Earth. Again, I emphasize in polar regions. Very cold air is much denser than the average atmosphere. In such cases, you get better mirages. This is looking north from Ross Island. Both of those are icebergs, the obvious tabular one, no problem about it. But the other one, eroded and turned over, is doing very well to look like a rocky island. They operated during principally the 1800s. You can see they overlapped a little bit. First, they were taking fur seals, quite a major profit. There was trade in London and the New England states of North America. When they were becoming quite rare, overexploited, elephant seals were taken. These all have to get to islands or somewhere ashore to breed. And the sealers, they thought, in many of their discoveries, the seals were moving elsewhere. The truth was they were just about being exterminated. So the sealers were always looking for new islands. So the idea of leading the prey astray, well, leading the competition astray, like gold miners finding gold. There were lots of rumours about existent and non-existent islands, and a lot of deception came from the competition with the sealers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that roughly sets the scene. But let's go round and look at them. As you can see by the top right, this is chapter 3. If we look at the volcanics south of South Africa, then the first sighting of this series of islands, here's the map drawn in 1826, and you can see Liverpool Island. Just north, it's a bit hard to read, but on the upper right is the Chimneys, which is a significant place name if we're talking about volcanoes. We have Lindsay, Thompson and Liverpool Island, nicely sketched by a fellow who was reliable from the point of view of cartography. Indeed, they appeared on quite respectable charts 1880, and the note that they are volcanic. The position of these islands was uncertain. The German expedition aboard Valdivia managed to get them on a map from earlier charts, but notice there's bathymetry there. Valdivia didn't actually see them, which seeing they're non-existent is quite reasonable, but they persisted on the charts. 1921, the Antarctic chart from Scott's expedition. There they all are, quite reasonably placed. They remained until investigations from the Germans with Valdivia, then with Meteor, the Norwegians with Norvegia, and Discovery too. The Admiralty notice to mariners, issued irregularly but with significant points, decided that these, after the searches, had been disproved. And rocks near one of them, it's the death sentence for a non-existent island. They are ordered to be expunged from the charts. Uvitoya exists. There it is. Quite an amazing view. The remotest bit of land on Earth. And if you look at the upper left, you can see the signs of a crater. And indeed, near there, on the coast, there's some quite active fumaroles and steam vents. Admiralty chart, 2008. Green is Butoya. Look at the two red arrows. One has bathymetry of 93, the other is 69 meters. I think that's a case of the volcano did its job. Those islands are currently non-existent, and glaciological research shows that one can think that what happened that got rid of those islands was probably about 1894. Again, south of Africa, Pagoda Rock and Trollsklippen. Pagoda Rock, Thomas Edward Law's Moore aboard HMS Pagoda, was on a magnetic survey, doing careful work, and Trollsklippen was a Norwegian. Pagoda Rock appeared on the South Polar chart. As you can see, I've enlarged it. There was some question, it was doubtful. But this was during a revision of the charts, getting them all together. That's the 1912 chart. They were inserted on the charts, pending further investigation by the Notice to Mariners in 1918. It didn't last very long, because Shackleton's Quest expedition, after Shackleton had died, it continued commanded by Frank Wild. He found in the position of Pagoda Rock a depth of 2,902 fathoms, 5,310 meters, and had the comment that they can be safely removed from the chart. After the Quest expedition, after the loss of Shackleton, many of the remaining objects of the expedition were accomplished, including looking at the islands. I mentioned Trollsklippen at the beginning, the last of these non-existents to be found. Quite nicely sketched, surrounded by pack ice, and there's Isaacson's Norwegian chart on the left, where they were looking for it. It could have been a base for whalers. Just to the right of it is a smaller chart. They also had a look for Pagoda Rock, and in both cases, of course, 1932 found nothing. South of Australasia, two interesting ones, Royal Company and Emerald. Emerald reported by William Elliot aboard a ship called Emerald. The Spanish one was one of the trading voyages going to the Philippines. There you have, red they don't exist, at Auckland Island, Campbell Islands and Macquarie Island, south of Australia and New Zealand, are well known and existing. There's a couple of interesting stories about this I'll bring in there. The New Zealand pilot, here it is, published in 1908, actually had, you can see the little insets in the bottom left, a map of the non-existent islands shown on the charts. Auckland, Campbell and the other existent islands were in the other insets. Now let's give them some credit. They did suggest the existence of this island is very doubtful, but they give the note from the vessel Emerald. Quite reasonable to think it was named after a ship. The ship was a sealer. I suspect that what had happened then is they had actually seen Macquarie Island. They were roughly in the same latitude, although the longitude was wildly wrong. And the Emerald Island applied to Ireland, a very green island in the Canadian Arctic, and Macquarie Island here. If you look at the colour, I think that was a case of a sealer, not certain of his navigation. Well, it's interesting, a description of the island and the name of the ship all corresponded. There we have Royal Company Island, Auckland, Campbell and Macquarie, which do exist. And this one didn't have Emerald Island on it. South of the Pacific Ocean is a very interesting lot. You've got 4 named there. Doherty's or Keats, when they were found, were almost on top of each other, so I think that's a double discovery. But these were an interesting series of them. If you look here, you've got the non-existent Nimrod Island and Doherty's Island. Emerald and Royal Company I've left on there. I don't think I found a map with all 4, or 5 if you have the double on it, but Joshua Reynolds, the Secretary of State for the US Navy, was writing that Captain Macy of Nantucket was a very intelligent man, that he reports his island discovered. Captain Swain had another one. You'll see they're both 59 south. One is 91 and the other is 90 west, so whether they were the same, it might be so, but we've got corroboration here, and a fellow who was regarded as a good navigator reporting these islands. Doherty's Island, and I don't expect you to read a lot, but with a lot of controversy. This is the Otago Times, published in 1890. It's one of the New Zealand newspapers, and they had a number of people claiming to have seen it, sailed round it, and all sorts of things. Indeed, the Norwegians considered it might be a base for their Antarctic whaling industry, and paid for a lease of it. There it is, appearing in the South Polar Chart of 1921, with an indication it might not exist. Shackleton's Nimrod expedition, after returning from the Antarctic, was in Sydney and going back to Britain, before the Panama Canal, of course, looking for all these islands. Macquarie exists. No sign of Royal Company, Emerald, Nimrod, or Doherty. The Norwegians of whaling interests also came out of Cape Town, as you'll see on the right, made a close survey of that part of the Antarctic and came back looking for the purported position of Doherty's and Nimrods. In either case, you'll see they have vast distances, over 4,000 meters of the bathymetry. Unlikely they exist. Eventually, only a few years later, the death sentence that these islands are to be expunged from the charts was passed. Just an interesting aside, in 1965, someone actually had one of these micro-states, issued a constitution, started doing stamps and all sorts of things. This one, it's a pure philatelic deceit, but you've got freedom of religion, the racial equality, there's entry to space, the language was Esperanto, and he was actually selling these to philatelists. So this is a weird and wonderful, I think. However, one of these non-existent islands persisted, copied and copied. Here is a small section of one page of the Times Atlas of the World, published in 1982. Most of the map is on the other side of Antarctica. I can't say North Antarctica, and it was a map of the Indian Ocean. But this little inset remained. Swain's Island had persisted, as you see in the red inset. Someone even put bathymetry lines round it. Once they're on the charts, erring on the side of caution, it can be quite an effort to get rid of them. In the Bellingshausen Sea, you can see Peter I Island, a genuine one. There's P1, quite a large island. It's over 1,000 meters high in the summit. South of South America, there's a good mixture. Elizabeth Ides, seen by Francis Drake, and the Golden Hind. But Wood, that's more reasonable, and a strange one, Middle Island. Drake's view of South America. Well, let's turn it the right way so it's easier to understand. Elizabeth Ides, he described it, took water there, and had timber there. There's his map. Some sort of a lake, some sort of entrance. There's nothing quite like that in that position. If one looks at that part of South America, the closest actual position is Pactolus Back. That's over 200 meters deep. It's in a region where there's 3 tectonic plates meeting. And in the Andes, and indeed in Shetland Islands, there's quite a bit of volcanic activity. So things could be coming and going. And look at the other red arrows that I've pointed out, 126, 37, 154, 84, 165 meters deep. A volcanic, a tectonically active area. Perhaps one of those could have been Drake's Elizabethides. Birdwood Bank, that's easy. There it is, south of the Falklands. You've got depths of 44, 46, 53, and so forth around it. Now, if you've got a large iceberg drifting out of the Ross Sea, you can say it's 1 part up and 7 parts down. If it's 30 meters above sea level, that's 210 meters below sea level. So Birdwood Island is easily construed as an iceberg grounded on Birdwood Bank. Middle Island is a strange one, though. There it is in the Bransfield Strait, reported by 2 well-known and reliable navigators at the time when the South Shetland Islands had been discovered. If you look at a later sealer's map, it's still there. And Jules Sébastien César Dumont d'Urville, the major French navigator, has it on his chart. You can see he went in its vicinity. The map by Carl Anton Larsen aboard Jason not only went around there, included it in his map, and even put some contour lines on it, and as you can see in the inset in the lower left, changed course to miss it. That was 1893-94, but the Admiralty chart, published in 1910, has removed it entirely. It couldn't be found. What happened there? Well, it's an interesting point. Here we have the main part of the South Shetland Islands. Bridgeman Island, Penguin Island, and Deception Island are known to be seriously volcanic. You've got 4 other seamounts, the Axe, Three Sisters, Hook Ridge, and Orca. Orca isn't quite where Middle Island was supposed to be, but the water around it includes quite an amount of sulfur dioxide. That one's active too. I suspect that could have been the origin. At the moment, Deception Island, you saw it earlier in the lecture erupting in 1967, it did so in 69 and 70, is warming up, and that might be erupting again. So that could explain well corroborated Middle Island. Bridgeman Island's another one of the volcanoes. I've put that in, there's a view of it. James Weddell saw it smoking, and the modern map just to the left. We've even lost an actual existent island, let alone the non-existent ones in that particular spot. South of the Atlantic, some interesting old ones and one with a rather good story. Isla Grande, Antonio de Roche, who probably saw South Georgia, gave it. Aurora, well, I'll show you those in a moment. And there's a strange story by Benjamin Morel about New South Greenland. This map shows you Cook's Elizabethides, but just north of South Georgia is Isla Grande. That remained on respectable maps for quite a long time. One of the old maritime publications, the Nautical Magazine, here's the edition in 1853, had a paper about it, giving the history and background and details, but solved the mystery fairly satisfactorily. There's a sketch on the second page made by one of the passengers given to Captain Haig, and it's put there so you can form it was nothing more than an ice island, and it may assist others in forming their judgment. Iceberg, I think, is the answer, probably a morainic one. The Aurora Islands, Malaspina, an excellent and well done Spanish circumnavigation, got these on the maps. There's nothing like them. Sealers saw it subsequently. What is there? 6 rocks, as you can see on the bottom right. On the bottom left, that's the same rocks seen from the air. And that doesn't fit the descriptions. I suppose that, bearing in mind it was the late 1700s, if there was a lot of pack ice around there, they could have looked more extensive. But Aurora Islands appear where, Shag Rocks appear where Aurora Islands were said to lie. Benjamin Morel, here he is, with his book of 4 voyages. Kenneth Bertrand, writing Americans in the Antarctic, an excellent book for the details of that part of the world, did give him a reputation, or repeated his reputation of being the biggest liar in the Pacific. bearing in mind that he reckoned he'd rowed round South Georgia, entering every harbour and anchorage in 4 days. At least he was imaginative. His idea of finding something like the bird of paradise on the South Sandwich Islands is a bit difficult to justify. On his 4th voyage, he took his wife. She wrote her book, which differs a lot from his. On the voyage that reported New South Greenland, he had Jack Halyard, who was the mate, and he wrote a book to entertain children, quite different also from Morell's accounts, not backing up his discovery. But it got on the maps. William Bruce, who established an observatory in the South Orkney Islands in Scotia Bay, was a major Antarctic explorer, had this map in a general Antarctic booklet he produced. Graham Land, the Antarctic Peninsula, is alive and well, but he still had this strange New South Greenland extending up there, purely based on Morell's speculations. There were 2 expeditions that thought they'd have a look for it. The Faulkner expedition aboard Deutschland, beset in the Weddell Sea ice, made a sledging expedition in that direction looking for it and found nothing. Shackleton's Endurance expedition, drifting north in the pack, was in its vicinity and again made explorations for it. The first likely stuff, closer examination resolved into icebergs, and at the position where it was supposed to be, 3,500 meters deep was in the region. Further evidence of the non-existence of New South Greenland. Just south of South Georgia, there's 3 rocks appear, named after ships that found them, Strathfilm, Undine and Sevilla. If we look them on a map, here they are. The 3 ships were whale catchers. I rather think they'd almost got into competition of finding these things, and Clippan, which I mentioned earlier in the lecture, makes the 4th one of these at a rush in a short period of time of whale catchers. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've been once round the Antarctic. I reckon that probably 10 of them were likely to be morainic icebergs, those in the open ocean where it's deep. Birdwood Island are grounded icebergs. Aurora, Emerald, Royal Company, I think that's navigation problems. Captain didn't know where he was. The volcanoes, well, the Elizabethides, Chimneys, Lindsay, Middle and Thompson Island might well fit that one. And New South Greenland was merely imaginative ambition. There's one other thing I'll put here, ladies and gentlemen. You'll notice the World Bibliographical Series, a book in the days when bibliographies came in books, entirely dealing with the bibliography of the Antarctic, and a special edition of the Annals of Tourism Research, the special issue Antarctic Tours. Look at both of those maps. There's an entire continent missing from them, from their special Antarctic numbers. Oh dear. Anyway, that's what I wanted to give you an idea about. Are there any more non-existent islands? One can say that they encumbered the charts and didn't encumber the ocean. They are useful if you see them on maps, as with the peri-Antarctic islands and many other features. It's a useful thing for identifying the dates and periods of the maps. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bob. What a fascinating presentation. I want to take this time to offer our thanks for your detailed and inspired information about this a really interesting topic, but I really want to open it up to our membership. I'm sure there's many questions. I'm going to start with Ron Gibbs because he put one in the chat, and I'll turn it over to Ron to ask you.
Well, Bob, thank you for a wonderful presentation. My thought was, how did an early explorer name an island that he thought he found? Was there any process for that? Was it named after a benefactor, a family member, the appearance, or all of them?
Ron, most of the islands were ships and features named the family members and supporters. The Antarctic has plenty of those, but there's descriptives. A lot were ship names. There's not very many captain names. I think it's mainly descriptive topology. If they'd have been found, there might have been a little more detail. But for instance, Scott Island, originally named Markham Island, that was named in honorific of Captain Scott, but that's one of the existing ones. So they were themselves.
Thank you.
If anyone else would like to ask a question, please feel free to unmute and start talking. I think Mark Thurber's thinking about it.
Well, I guess one question. So on any of your personal travels, were there any that you visited to try to redeem or otherwise?
Personal travels, there's a few places where we've had some doubtful ones. The K Islands off Cape Adair, they've been on charts for ages. Aboard Kapitan Hrebnikov, we sailed right through the middle of them, so that fixes that one. There was a doubtful one with a very well-known Antarctic name, Penguin Island, and dozens of those, was off the Shackleton ice shelf. That had a good qualification. I didn't put it in the lecture because it was quite close to the continent. It was a lot of rocks. It looked as though it was a nunatak, a rocky peak, but the ice shelf had gone and taken the rocks with it, so that one vanished, but we're able to confirm that it was no longer there. So there are the various mysteries. I think it comes under the heading of weird and wonderful for quite a lot of them, perhaps more wonderful than weird. It can be something if you're on a voyage that is safe going, for instance, from the Antarctic Peninsula to the Ross Sea. There's not much to see on the coast. It's the Phantom Coast. It's usually full of pack. That's the time for delivering a lecture on the non-existent islands and challenging the passengers to find them.
That's fantastic, Bob.
Thank you.
You were an archivist for quite some time at the Scott Polar Research Institute. And I'm just wondering, as map junkies as we are, if there's anything unique, special, or any kind of like find that you did as the archivist and curator there for such a long time.
Oh, now careful, we'll definitely run out of time if I start on this one. Remember the heroic age of Antarctic exploration from the mid-1890s till the First World War stopped exploration almost everywhere. There was an enormous amount of interest, many national expeditions, and Shackleton gets more intense interest than anybody else at the moment. Then with the various sales, the various inquiries, sometimes tried to separate the university from money to give it to Christie's, and things like this were very much part of my work. But with the heroic age, I think I prefer not to call it the heroic age, because all ages had heroes. And the intentions, the idea of mapping the interior, working out what's in the interior of the continent, and likewise the same period in the Arctic, the attainment of the North Pole, were the aspects then. It was penetration of the continent for the south or of the Arctic Ocean for the north. But we did have quite a rush of centenaries.
Bob, thank you very much. I'm curious to know your map origin story. How did you originally become interested in maps?
My early work was biogeography. Part of my studies were in Australia, in billabongs and deserts and this, what got where, when and how. To make a long story short, similar questions with these peri-Antarctic islands. A lot of things that got there. I was largely doing botanical at the beginning, but you can take all biology with something where there's not much of it. Was by human influence. The various ships, so you needed to know who went when where. You could usually work out the why. So these little refugia, minute places in the ocean, with their distinct flora and fauna, part of the interest. So for that, you need to get to know the maps well. You get to know the history well, and then your beard slowly goes white and you turn into a historical geographer rather than a biogeographer.
What is a biogeographer?
Distribution of animals and plants. The rare strange ones, the marsupials in South America and Australia, the different subspecies of reindeer, for instance, as you go from the Svalbard one, which is closest to the Greenland one, which is closest to the caribou of North America. It'll take you across the Bering Strait, and the most distant ones to those are the ones in Norway. So all sorts of problems like this.
That's
The
fascinating.
introduced animals. I've had quite a bit to do with this in the Antarctic. You can put it this way, again, making a long story short, the good, bad, and the ugly, and the effects they've had. The natural biota, usually not much experience with things, but with shipwrecks, of course, half the islands got rats. There were rabbits, the introduction of reindeer, they were an asset. There were the sledge dogs, and that's where you get the good, bad, and ugly, and the effects, some beneficial. Reindeer on South Georgia were good. They've now been removed as the glaciers were retreating and they were spreading. When I was there, we had the weapons out. For Christmas, we used to shoot some Bambi and Rudolph for dinner. But that's a little bit of the applied biogeography.
Oh my gosh. Luckily, there's no one under 10 on this Zoom. Now, I did want to just ask if, unless someone else had a question, you're working with the Antarctic Heritage Trust to maintain the huts from early explorations. How many huts are there, or is there one particular grouping of huts that's most important that we preserve?
That's fascinating stuff, because the earliest human habitation on the entire continent was built in 1898 and wintered in 1899. It was a Scandinavian log cabin construction, and it's still there. The expeditions of Scott, Shackleton, and Mawson, their huts are still there. Amundsen is gone. He built it on the ice shelf, and that carved off. So you've got these historical relics. They're generally in good condition, although the New Zealand and the British Antarctic Heritage Trust have done a lot of work involved with them. Remember, they're effectively in the fridge. There's not very many visitors, and they're all well behaved. Humanity does a lot of damage to these things. They were often overstocked, twice as much food as they needed, in case you got caught for an extra winter. So they're around. If you know the history and background, you can walk round or show round and guide round. I say they're full of ghosts, but good friendly ones from only a century or so ago. That again is a short answer. I could give you another lecture on that, but not now.
We'll put a pin in that for next time. Any other final questions for the wonderful Bob Hedlund before we take our break?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned about navigation. I was always curious how Shackleton was able to go from the continent to what was it, Georgia Island or something, where there was a whaling station. He was in a small boat with a bunch of crew members to escape after being frozen for a year or so. How did he navigate that?
That was an amazing voyage. There were 6 of them aboard the modified, the decked-over lifeboat, James Caird. They had over 800 nautical miles across some of the most tempestuous oceans. Frank Worsley, the commander of Endurance, was an extremely efficient navigator. They had reasonable charts at the time. There were whaling stations on South Georgia at that time, 4 of them, and the only chance of rescue. The closest places would have been South Shetlands, Tierra del Fuego, or the Falkland Islands, but the winds and currents were against them, so they went with the wind and current. That direction was known. Worsley had great difficulty. There was only a couple of times when the sky was clear to get star sights, but his use of the sextant, the necessary tables and the calculations, got them to South Georgia. They reached the southern coast. It rises almost 3,000 meters high, so they had a problem getting round to rescue. They had to cross the island. But it was brilliant navigation by Worsley. His book of tables and calculations were some of the documents that survived. We have those in the Scott Polar Research Institute. James Caird, the boat, 8.23 meters long. That survived too. It was back in his old school. He was a Dulwich College boy, and you can see it in southeast London. But again, that could be a lecture in its own right. How many lectures have I offered this afternoon?
Are you telling us that the boat Shackleton traveled in for this, smaller voyage to get help still exists and you can go visit it?
Yes, it is. James Caird, she was recovered from South Georgia. The whalers took her around. taken back to Britain as quite one of the few relics of the expedition. After all, until 2 years ago, Endurance was gone. One of his sponsors, who gave money for the Quest expedition, was an old schoolmate of his at Dulwich College, so he gave the ship to the college. It's in southeast London, and part of Dulwich College got a bit bombed by the Nazis, the Luftwaffe. That did some damage to James Caird. But one of the original shipwrights from the expedition was still alive and well and patched her up and did a very good job. Most of her is authentic, and she's in the school now as one of their very significant relics. Yes, Dulwich College, there's a James Caird Society, usually dines there a couple of times a year. I've lectured there, but James Caird is one of the relics still going.
That's fantastic. We'll find the link and put the information in for everybody
Thank you
during the
for
break.
the
Bob, thank you
information.
so much for this incredible lecture. We're so delighted to host you today. Right now, we will take a 10-minute break. So if everyone can get back here by 11, we will kick it off with our next speaker, Suzanne Connect, on circumnavigating the globe. Thank you again, Bob, so much.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks very much, everybody.
Wonderful.
The sun has set and I'm going to dinner now. Thank you.
Bob, before you go, personal thanks. Wonderful presentation.
Oh, you've had it twice wrong.
Great. Wonderful to see you. Have a wonderful dinner.
Thank you.
Bye.
Lisa or Suzanne, if you're available, I've pinned you. If you want to turn your video and sound on, we'll do a quick test. I'm going to text you. Oh, hi.
I heard you. We heard you.
Wonderful.
Hi.
Hi, Suzanne. So nice to meet you.
How are you?
I'm great. We're so
Can
excited
you hear
to
us
have
okay?
you speak next. We can hear you for sure. And
Great.
the ability to screen share should be available to you if you want to just give it a
Let's
quick
just
try.
try it. Yeah.
I can see the image. Are you able to scroll to the next slide?
Let's make sure. Yep,
Perfect. Okay.
we're good.
Suzanne, can we do a vocal test with you?
You can? Can you hear me?
Absolutely perfectly. Thank you so, so much. All right. I'm going to
Okay, thank you.
remove this for now. Let me
Okay.
remove my pin and I will remove your pin. And you can keep your screen share up for now.
Okay.
So
Sounds
it's ready
good.
to go. And I'll do a quick introduction of you and then turn it over.
Okie doke.
All right. I'll see you in a few
All right, I'm
minutes.
gonna do this temporarily.
I got to go let my puppy out.
Oh, ours are running around, running amok.
I tried to get rid of the noisy toys, but he found them and brought them in. So I've been muted the whole time,
That's the
listening to
best.
crunch, crunch,
I'm a
crunch.
teacher. I'm a teacher and I would teach on Zoom and invariably there would be some squeaky, horrible toy through every class all the time. Yeah, I get it.
So true. All right. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Suzanne. It's Ron.
Go ahead. There you go.
Hi, Ron.
Hi. Well, this is a great coming together.
Well,
Thank you.
it's delightful, and I thank you for doing this. And I hope I bring honor upon you.
I'm sure there is no doubt. Well, we have a wonderful nautical theme.
Boy, no kidding.
It was just great to have Bob on also. So how have you been the last few months?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Great, great.
And
Did you bump into the newlyweds at all?
oh, yes, they live very close to me, so I see them not all that infrequently. And
Great.
they're doing good. They're doing good.
Yeah, how far apart is Matt and Annalisa's house?
They are about 10-minute drive.
Mm-hmm.
They're in Grayton, which is sort of the next town over from where we are.
Yeah, we'll have to get up one of these weekends and pay everyone a visit.
That would be really nice. That would be lovely. And like to see Jane and your kids. And
Yeah,
anyway, whatever, it would be really a pleasure.
yeah, good.
Have you started another book yet?
Yeah, well, I'm almost done it.
You're kidding.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
I'm just getting it ready for uploading.
Mhm.
And I was working on the cover Thursday with some friends, and I'm just putting the final touches on it. It's called The Rogue's Plot, and I'll be sure to let you know about it.
Oh, wonderful. I think I will not have a new one to trade with you, however.
Well, yours required some real hard work to get it ready.
I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess, but it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I sometimes ask myself, what did I enjoy more, doing the circumnavigation or writing the book? It was kind of a toss-up. I mean, I love them both. The circumnavigation obviously triumphed, but still.
Well, I consider myself a dyed-in-the-wool armchair sailor, and and some of your descriptions made me thankful that I was an armchair sailor.
Well, in retrospect, I'm glad I wasn't an armchair sailor.
Yeah.
Once you get back in the berth and you're safe, then all of the little dangerous moments just kind of go away and meld into memory.
Yeah, well, I have one of the great selective memories also.
It helps.
It definitely does. Dara and Suze were on earlier. They have some sort of event to go to, and they were hoping to watch you when you were scheduled earlier, but they will watch the video.
Suzanne, we're very, very excited to hear your presentation.
Oh,
we
there's
just have,
Oh, hi. There you are.
Hi.
Hi, nice to see you.
we just have
Is
to go
that
to
Jane
a,
next to you?
that's
I
Jane
think I'm
behind
seeing
Ron.
Jane behind you.
Yeah, but we're excited. We're going to watch it recorded though, because we have to go to a birthday brunch. But yeah, thanks for doing this.
Oh, well, thank you very much, and enjoy your birthday brunch. It'll be lovely, I'm sure.
Good, Dare.
Hi, Dare.
Hi, there you are. Okay.
Hi, guys.
Nice to
Are
see you, Courtney.
You too, Suzanne. Managed to get my dog back in the house. I have a 7-month-old puppy who's learned.
Is it nasty where you are? How's the
It's
weather where you
raining,
are?
so yeah, I'm covered in a little bit of mud, but that's okay.
We were predicted to have snow and then rain here,
Oh.
but I haven't seen anything that looks like a flake, so.
Wow, that's good. That's good. Well, it's 11:01, so why don't I kick us off with an introduction of Suzanne Connect, and then she can get started on her amazing presentation as our third speaker of today. So Suzanne Connect is a native of Canton, Ohio, and attended the Connecticut College for Women, graduating with a BA in European history. Hello, what's not to love? Suzanne then moved to San Francisco, where she first worked as a consultant in the planning, design, and administration for an actuarial firm in the field of retirement plans. While there, she also studied fine art, first at the San Francisco Academy of Art and then at the College of Marin. After moving to San Anselmo, California around that time, Suzanne transitioned from consulting to focusing on home to have more time with her family, artwork, and her broader community. Suzanne's talk for us today is inspired by her personal experience and published memoir, Night Watch, Memoirs of a Circumnavigation, that recounts her 2-year, 3,000-mile voyage that encountered over 30 different countries. Now, Suzanne and her husband had enjoyed sailing for many years before their circumnavigation adventure. And in fact, they had completed 3 Pacific Cup races to Hawaii, a 4-month cruise to Mexico, and had also sailed for 7 months in Alaska. Truth be told, this couple have been adventurers of both land and sea and often made land cruises in their 21-foot RV, traveling to national parks across the United States, plus journeys to Canada and Alaska. Suzanne now lives in Sebastopol, California, reinvented as a farmer with a couple of acres of vines and a few olive trees, and where she tends to her 2 beloved dogs while reveling in the joy of her family. Please help me welcome Suzanne Connect as she shares some of her unique experiences with us today. Thank you, Suzanne.
Hi, everybody. I have to say it's an honor to be here. And I owe that to one of your soulmates, Dr. Ron Gibbs, whom I met at a wedding. We started talking and we got to a point where we realized that each of us had written a book. And so, of course, we decided we would do a trade. I loved his book, The Long Shot, not just the plot, but also the writing. It was excellent. And I guess he must have liked my book because he decided he wanted to introduce me to you guys. And I think what he really liked is that I had drawn a lot of maps in it. I'm one of these people who, when I'm dealing with something that has geographic issues in it, I like to have maps. So that's how I am here, and he is totally responsible for my being here. I must say, though, I am not a map collector. I love maps. I love charts. I love the artistry, the creativity, the beauty, and the imagination, and even the historical implications, especially of some of the inaccuracies. But I admit that more than that, I really love their practical value, because when you're at sea, that's what will get you back into your berth instead of into notoriety that you will get if you become one of those little wreck marks on another chart. I did do one race from San Francisco to Hawaii when I was the navigator. And I did that solely with celestial navigation. And it was enough for me to understand how Joshua Slocum could say in his book, Sailing Alone Around the World, when he was in the Southern Ocean, where I think all the waves kind of looked alike, that he always knew where he was. You can do that. It surprised me, because you become friends with the stars and they come out and meet you at night, hopefully hopefully after the ocean has calmed down a bit, so that you can get your sights on them. And eventually you start seeing latitude and longitude lines on the ocean. I always knew where I was. It was an absolutely wonderful feeling. Sort of akin to having a map ashore, where otherwise you would be using GPS and you have no idea what's going on around you. The other thing that is important in this is the charts that you have. For this circumnavigation, I use GPS almost the whole way. I did do some celestial, but the accuracy and the ease of using GPS kind of made it easier for me. And part of that but you still couldn't rely on either one totally. It depended on your chart. If you had a chart that was of an area there where navies didn't really venture very far, the chart could be 100 or 200 years old. It may not have been updated, and it would have been made by some fallible human being from a bouncing boat. No more accurate than you could expect. Sometimes the accuracy was off over a mile, and you could very carefully from the chart plot a GPS position, but if you didn't watch it, you could end up under a tree in a forested peninsula. So there's always a little bit of chance in everything. However, in the areas that were close, such as the entrance to oh, just a minute, let me change my thing here. If you were in an area that was close with reefs and rocks and things like that, especially if they were underwater and you couldn't see them, celestial navigation would not be particularly reliable. I would never expect to get that good of a fix. Okay, now I'll tell you about the boat that we took. We had a boat, it's a Moody 425, a 42-foot boat that it's a sloop, and we had it outfitted so that it was very, very comfortable underneath. We had, for navigation equipment, we had a sextant, an HP calculator that was designed to reduce sights, a slew of charts, and a GPS. Also, we had an autopilot to keep us on a course that was consistent with the compass. Unfortunately, it tended to crap out on us a lot. We had we also had a wind vane that we named Sam, and Sam performed beautifully the whole trip. We could be on a course with 30, 40 knots of wind, downwind, and we never jibed accidentally once when Sam was steering. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and you can see here what the inside of the boat looked like. We had a quarter cabin for our crew. Oh, I'll tell you about the crew first. We had, let me start from the beginning here on our crew and on this voyage. When I was 11 years old, a friend asked me to go sailing with her family. And at the end of that day, I had loved it so much that I made a promise to myself that someday I was going to sail around the world. I didn't know when, where, or how, but at 11, that doesn't matter. Fast forward about 18 years, and I met this man named Jerry. And within 10 minutes of talking to him, I knew viscerally that this was the man that I wanted to spend my life with. Fast forward another 18 years, or no, I'm sorry, 8 years, another 8 years, and we were married. And 15 years later, we got aboard the night watch, went under the gate, and out we went. There were 3 of us on board. If you're looking at the screen now, Jerry is the one on your left. Obviously, I'm in the middle. And the other one is a young man named John McVeigh. He was a young 41 when we assigned him on to be crew. And the reason we did that was that Jerry was 63, and he not only had kind of an iffy back, but he also had 3 aortic valve replacements at that point. And I had somewhat of a tendency to the mal de mer. So we thought it would be best to have another crew member. John was fabulous. And he was with us for the whole venture until, except for a few weeks when he went home, because when he was on shore, in Raiatea, he was on a motor scooter exploring, and he was chased by a wild dog. Excuse me, a pack of wild dogs, hit a pothole and fell and broke his shoulder. So we sent him home for a few weeks, and so he could recover. He also had lots of lacerations, and you don't want to fool around with that in the tropics because it's very hot and bacteria grows very, very quickly. Okay, so we are off now. We sailed under the gate, turned to a south-southwest course, and went to the Marquesas. We had big winds and seas almost the whole way to the Marquesas. One night when I was on watch, we were sailing downwind under full sail when I looked at the instruments and saw that we had 45 knots of wind behind us, which means that when you add the speed of the boat, which was about 9 knots, it was more like 53 knots of wind. And these were big seas, and we had full sail up. John and Jerry were on deck before my scream petered out. So we kept night watches that were approximately 3 hours, and we were all willing to come up at a moment's notice. 20 days, 8 hours, and 11 minutes after we left the harbor, we pulled into Atwaana Bay on Hivaoa. And what we found is that the Marquesas, excuse me for a second. Let's do the next one. This is Atwaana Bay right here we're pulling into. It was beautiful. The Marquesas, I don't know if you've been there or not. There's jungle along the shore, and then above that are grassy hills that lead to razor sharp ridges. It's a place that has a sense of mystery about it. In the jungle, you'll see things, little piles of stones that are debris from an earlier time. The people, when they're not in public, or when you overhear them sometimes, they're speaking their own native language instead of the official language, which is French. And you get this sense that the wild horses that run free on the island and all the roosters are the ones that own the island, that the people are mere tenants. It's a very strange feeling, but it's beautiful. I did meet one of the horses. This wasn't one of the wild ones. Excuse me for a second. This wasn't one of the wild ones, but it owned one of the trees. Apparently all the trees there have owners. And this horse would stand just beyond the shade line of the tree and wait for a mango to fall. And then it would trot in, get the mango, scarf it, trot back out again, and wait some more with his head down and his eyes half closed. We didn't want to pick any of its mangoes because it needed everything it could get. But more than that, the Marquesas are a place that I was always looking for, because I wanted to find a place that was not a tourist trap, a tourist mecca, and had tourist traps all over the place. Well, that's what we found. It had the facilities, but this is what they were. Here was the dinghy dock. Here was the shower. And they had a complete laundry here. Don't ask me what you do with the rocks there, but it was a complete laundry. And this is where you could go in Taiohae Bay to tie up if you wanted to get ashore. As you can see, it was a little tricky to do that. You had to have somebody hoist you up so that you could get the rest of the way up the wall. Okay, we are now at, oh, where's my list of things? My list of them. We are now at Daniels Bay, which was a beautiful place. We met Daniel. He he was a retired man. He was known for his wooden sculptures. And we asked if we could see them. He said that he stopped doing that. He retired at age 65. And he said, I mean, look at this. I've got my pension. I've got mangoes. I've got papaya. I've got breadfruit. I've got lots of wahoo. I've got all the rest of these things. And it was everything that he would ever need. So he had retired. Okay, next slide. We are now at the Tuamotus, and the Tuamotus are atolls. What it is coral that has built a reef on top of volcanoes, and inside there is a lagoon, and it's a place where there's very calm water. The water in this area is not particularly calm, but here it is very calm. The way you get into the lagoon is you don't necessarily use a chart. You find the gap, you make sure you have some coconuts on board, and then what you do is when it looks like the water is getting a little bit smoother, you drop a coconut into the water, and if it goes into the gap, you follow it right in. Inside, what you find are the animals that like the calm water as well. It's a snorkeler's paradise. Once you start in, the way you navigate is by conning. You look down and yell to the skipper, turn to port, turn to starboard, because there are rocks here. The Society Islands, this is on shore at the Tuamotus. This is when we had dinner down below on the boat. And this is Cook's Bay in Moorea. I know at least one of you is a proponent of Cook's Bay, and there it is. So societies, I wasn't particularly fond of. Oh my goodness, time is really going by. The societies I wasn't particularly fond of because what they really had is fast food and traffic jams. We had hair-raising sail into Pongo Pongo. Winds behind us, huge current, made it very difficult. We were sailing at night, and we'll put all the waypoints in the GPS so that we wouldn't run into the reefs. Let's move on faster here. This is John. When we picked him up, he flew back from Raiatea into Samoa, American Samoa, because it was the easiest place. But he was all healed by the time we got him back. There were squalls out in part of the Pacific, and this is what they looked like. This is the entrance into American Samoa. It was ghastly, a really dreadful place, filthy, dirty, difficult. And this is sort of what it felt like going in. You couldn't steer straight. You had to crab, which means you have to point in a direction that is not the direction you want to go. The lights on shore can be very bothersome. This is how you check in Pago Pago with the officials. This is a little village on Tonga. We got to Tonga next, and it is an island. It is one of our favorites. They have no electricity. They are very religious people. The missionaries really got to them. And the biggest thing there is the singing. They have a bell ringer who on Sunday will call the three churches, congregants to the three churches, and they go in, and I swear it was Renee Fleming across the aisle from me and Placido Domingo behind me. The singing is absolutely spectacular. And we were talking with a man not too long after that on Kinatu, which is the island that first sees the daytime. And he was telling us that the reason they go to all three ceremonies or services every day. They do that because they're trying to get into God's choir of angels. They figure that's how they're going to get to heaven. But this man said that he he wouldn't count on that himself. But he also said that the bell ringer is important as well. And let's see if I have the bell ringer here. This is the bell ringer's way of calling the people to services. The children get dressed up. They have no electricity here, and they are always looking neat. This is the church. And then we had dinner at the only restaurant, Caroline's restaurant. Caroline is the sister of the Queen of Tonga. She did not like the hullabaloo of the royal family, so she came out to live here on an island without electricity or anything else for that matter. And that's how people make their money with these mats that they make. If the women, when they get to a certain age, like when they graduate from high school, they have to take a test if they want to get to the mainland and work. And if they don't pass it, they end up making mats because it's really the only work that they have on the island. Here we're in Fiji, and we have to buy kava to take to the islands to give to the chief of the islands so that they will let us anchor. This is we're getting to the, this was in Vanuatu. Just a second back in. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at this kind of thing. We're in Vanuatu here. That's okay. That's a missionary pot that everybody gets into to be boiled. We're in Australia now. What really amazed me in Australia is that the people didn't speak well of the Aborigines. And even people who were educated and everything spoke very disdainfully of them. But then we went to the Darwin Museum and we saw Aborigine art that was just absolutely wonderful. After Vanuatu, we sailed through the, I'm sorry, we're in Australia. Okay, this is not my forte, you guys. We had, after Australia, we went through Indonesia, and our first stop was in the island of Flores, where they have 3 volcanoes that have pools in them, lagoons in them. One is blue, one is green, one is black, and sometimes they just change colors at the same time. Here we are on the island of Rinja. We have come to see the great Komodo dragons. And it was very, very hot. We took off on a death march with a guide to go see the dragons, and we found one. Here is one, and what he was doing is he's waiting for a water buffalo to come by. He would give it a whap with his leg, and the buffalo would have a broken leg. He would lie there, and eventually the dragon would come back when he had no more strength, and it was an easy meal. But we were looking for them in just boiling hot weather, and finally we found them. They were they were all under a tree. There were a whole bunch of them under a tree, just staying in the shade. I didn't take a picture because I didn't want to get that close. Now we're in Bali, which is one of my very favorite places. It is refreshing. There's a combination of emphasis on self-realization of the individual, but not for egotistical purposes. And there's balance, beauty, creativity, and a sense of who you are as a result of culture. It feels like you just have a place. People have a place. They have duties to their ancestors and to the gods, and to live their lives with beauty and grace. Each person, we went on a tour, and the guide who I'm not sure that he was absolutely authorized to say this, but what he advised us of is that each person has their own God who speaks to them. So you really can't judge others if they're listening to their God. The community joins together in doing everything, like working in the rice fields. And then he mentioned this one little idea, which I thought was wonderful. As to the idea of sin, self-indulgent nonsense. But in Bali, the air is full of fragrance, the gentleness and appreciation of art. Balance is in the family compound. These are people on procession to the temples. They come to the temples to honor their ancestors as much as the gods. Here is working in the rice fields. And this is a family compound, and you can see the balance and the harmony in just the arrangement of the water and the plants. The religion, of course, is very important, but it seems to me like it's not one that's based on thou shalt, which has always sounded to me like the voice of a man ordering his wife around instead of a code for happiness. And here's one of the artists. Now we are in Thailand, and it is the king's birthday. We are on the big arena, or just big field, outside of the palace. These men are clearing it of the people because people have been going through there with the entertainment. They've had music, all sorts of different dancing and things like that for people to really enjoy during the day, but it's getting a little bit late and it's time for the ceremonies to begin. So these guys came out to clear the people off to the perimeters. Then the guys with the brooms will come out and sweep this dusty place. And the king is in presence. His presence is shown on a 50-foot poster that rises above the ground. On the king's birthday, everybody eats. Nobody goes hungry when the king is having his birthday. There was one small area close to the end of the field where important politicos were. Oh, just a minute. I didn't mean to hit that one. Where there were important politicos. There were marches by every division of the military, by the nurses, any group that had uniforms. Of course, nobody could see them because they were at one end of the field and everybody else was along the perimeter of this great big field. But there were lots of TV cameras really recording the power of this group. Now, this is a picture I just loved. I just want to know what's going on in this Wat. When we were at the birthday, we talked to this man who was about to become a monk. All businesses must allow a man at least 6 months off to become or to study being a monk if they want to do it. And this guy was at that point. Anyway, what he really wanted to say to us was you guys need a king in your country. You guys have too much fighting between your executive and your congressional branches. You need a king to give moral authority, not power, but just moral authority. And others echoed that same thought. Thailand, of course, is a Buddhist country. Oh, okay. Okay. Here we are on the Andaman Sea. We're anchored outside of James Bond Island. Anyway, in Thailand, I love the sense of karma. It seemed like people were happy with who they were and what their lives were. There was a sense that everything is as it's supposed to be, and for a reason they don't know. They just plain seem happy. I compare that to our world in which we have to struggle to better ourselves and realize that what's happening sometimes is with the idea of success and success, this emphasis causes us to sacrifice. It has a price. And so what we sacrifice are we have to choose an artificial ideal in place of the things that are spiritual or psychologically important to us. Now we come to Sri Lanka. This is a shop in Sri Lanka. I found people were really unhappy in Sri Lanka. This woman complained about how she didn't like making lace. Here's a funeral procession. This man is walking on fiery coals. They do all sorts of stuff. You find everything you could possibly imagine in Sri Lanka. This guy is carving stone.
That pointing, there's nothing there that says that. They're not saying that. If so.
I'm sorry? Oh, okay.
Suzanne, I think it was just an unmute. You keep going.
Oh, okay.
You've got about
Sorry.
5 minutes left.
Okay. This is a snake charmer. This is a place called Sigiriya. It was a fortress that was built like during the 1400s or 1400 years ago. And there are amazing frescoes inside of it that are so foreign to what the country is today. It is also mostly a Buddhist country, but you have the Hindu Tamils, and they are still fighting. They've been living together for thousands of years, and they apparently will never have peace. There is a wonderful elephant orphanage in Sri Lanka, and this is a fertility place where cows are milked here, and women who want to have children are to drink the milk from the cow. Of course, they're not allowed in the temple because they're women. So what they have to do is outside of the little hole that you see there, go outside of that and suck up the milk from there. These are stick fishermen. Now we're in Oman. Oman is a very difficult country. We're going along the this is Sudan. Sudan was an unhappy country, and now we are going up the Red Sea. We met John and I went ashore one time to see what was there when we were going up the Red Sea. You go up the west coast of the Red Sea where there's a fringing reef, and in the fringing reef there are gaps where there are marshes, and some marshes are great, some have military establishments. This one was one we went up and we saw this man striding across the desert coming toward us, and he came up and he said, "You want a camel ride?" Well, of course we couldn't turn that down, so we arranged to meet a few hours later, and he brought a couple of camels for us. He took us to this village, and what we found is 4 houses. They belonged to his relatives. They were made of things that the goats wouldn't eat. And well, actually the goats were still gnawing on them. But he was very proud because his son was going to be able to go to school in the capital. This was in Port Sudan. This man was our agent. Oh, we're back to the camels again. Okay. This is how we fed the camels. This guy had a whole fleet of camels, or a whole group of camels, and he would bring them down and give them water every day. Fishermen in the Red Sea. John went fishing in the Red Sea. He loved to fish, and you can see he has a fish here, but there's only half of it there because before he could bring it in, a shark got it. We got to Egypt. This was a highlight of the time in Egypt. This little guy was captain of a felucca, and he took us out for a great ride on it. Oh, I'm running out of space. And then we get to Israel, and Israel was absolutely a relief after Egypt. We went to the Western Wall, and when you get up close, what you find are little pieces of paper in the cracks, and they're prayers by people. And when I got there, what I felt was a real sense of connection to all the women who would put all these cracks or papers in the cracks, because they lived long, hard lives, and they were my ancestors. Now we're approaching Gibraltar. I think you've probably seen the monkeys in Gibraltar. In Madeira, there is such a thing as a sleigh that goes down the mountains at about 30 miles an hour and crossing streets and everything else. It was a little bit hairy. Guys standing out there. This is Madeira. We have aqueducts there or levadas they're called, with paths beside them, great walking. We've gotten now to Porto Santo, which is one of my very favorite places. Let's go to Porto Santo. Porto Santo disappeared. But it's Porto Santo is where I started learning about Christopher Columbus. And it looks like I might not have trouble. I might have trouble trying to tell you about Christopher Columbus because it's kind of cool. But we're now in Tenerife, and Tenerife has sculptures all over the place, music. Now we're at the San Blas Islands, and these women were selling us molas. Okay, we're going to go home. There's the San Blas Islands. We had a wonderful time there. Trip into the jungle to find iguana. We went through the canal, and this is Panama. And we are sailing back into the gate. You can't really see us out there, but there's a little boat there. And this is my dog, Tori, who waited for us for 2 years and was there to greet us. We go into tie up and are greeted by our brand new grandchild, Ashley. And that's it. Thank you all.
Oh, Suzanne, that was so beautiful to see your homecoming.
Oh, thank you.
Courtney, do we have time for
we have time for a couple questions. Susan, Lisa, if you want to stop the share, that'd be great.
So Suzanne, you've given us a unusual sociologic and anthropologic perspective on exploration. When you were off the beaten path and came into some of these ports, what sort of reception did you get from the local peoples?
Depended on where you were. As I said, in Israel, people were so warm. They met us on the dock. The next day was Passover, and every yachty, regardless of what religion the yachty was invited to go into somebody's home for Passover dinner. We went to a little bakery there, two other women and myself, and we were sitting talking, and a table next to us of women were listening to us, and they said, "Excuse me for interrupting, but are you all down at the harbor?" And we said, "Yes, we are. We're on boats there." And they said, "Well, would you like to come to my house and take a bath and bring your laundry, because we have laundry machines?" That kind of thing, which was amazing. In Egypt, when we got into Safaga to check in, my husband jumped up on the dock to say hello to the officials who came down to the dock to meet us, and they came right up to him, and they started waving their hands in his face and said, "Do not get on here. Get back on your boat." And I mean, to the point where he stepped back, and it was a 2-foot drop, and that they just really intimidated him on that. And then the next thing they said was, "Do you have any corpses? Did anyone die?" I mean, that was an interesting greeting. Most places, people were very nice. They were welcoming. Yeah, on the islands, people were lovely. Niatobu Tapu, they were just charming. Yeah, generally they were lovely. And we made friends. We were able to talk with a lot of people. And like in the San Blas Islands, the man, which I didn't get to name, Dulcidio, who came to sell us crab and other fish he fished from his canoe, and he would bring it up to the boat. We became friends with him. He took us to his house and showed us the place where the pigsty was, and then took us on a hike through Rio Diablo so that we could see the tiger that was supposedly there that had confronted him several days before. That was quite a little venture. But yes.
Wow. Suzanne, you are filled with so many amazing stories. Just for everyone in our audience today, I've put a link to Suzanne's memoir, Night Watch Memoirs of Circumnavigation, into the chat in case anyone wants to pick it up at Amazon. And we could go on for like another hour talking about all these amazing interactions. But Suzanne, thank you so much for sharing some of them with us today. And we will allow people, if they want to ask any questions of Suzanne in the chat, they can do so. And Suzanne and her daughter, Lisa, will help facilitate that to get back to you. Otherwise, we will say thank you so, so much, Suzanne. And we will now move on to Chet Van Duzer. Thank you so much. Chet, I'm going to look for you right now. Let's see, let's pull you up. Excellent. Okay, so if I do a quick introduction of Chet, who we're so delighted to have joined us today. As many of you might already know, Chet is a historian of cartography. He is a board member of the Lazarus Project at the University of Rochester in New York. And this is important because it brings multispectral imaging to cultural institutions around the world. Now, multispectral imaging is very important technology because it's used to recover information from damaged or hard to read manuscripts. Chet, of course, has published extensively on medieval and Renaissance maps. Some of his recent books include Henricus Martellus World Maps at Yale, circa 1491, Multispectral Imaging, Sources and Influence. This was published in 2019 by Springer. And Martin Waldseemüller's Carta Marina, I don't know why I'm doing that with the Spanish accent, in 1516, a study and transcription of the long legends. This was also published by Singer in 2020. Last year, and his most recent book is called Frames That Speak, Cartouches on Early Modern Maps, published by Brill. And his current project is actually a really interesting one. It's on self-portraits by cartographers that appear on their own maps. But for us today, Chet's going to share his research on 16th century globes and maps with a focus on imagined territories around the South Pole, which is a wonderful bookend to what we heard from Bob Hedlund earlier this morning. Let's please give a warm welcome to Chet Van Duzer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Courtney, for that generous introduction. Yes, I'm going to be talking about early ideas about a southern continent. And this is long before any European discovery of Antarctica. There are some ideas that there was a sort of pre-discovery of Antarctica, and that early maps that show a southern continent reflect such a pre-discovery. That will not at all be my argument today. As a matter of fact, I'll be talking about the ideas that were behind this hypothetical southern continent. So we'll begin with a little historical context, the early cartographic history of the southern continent. And we'll begin with a passage from Cicero's The Dream of Scipio from the 1st century. And this work contains a vision of the universe. So seeing the earth and the spheres from up in the heavens. And Cicero writes, "Moreover, you see that this earth is girdled and surrounded by certain belts, as it were, of which two, the most remote from each other, and which rest upon the poles of the heaven at either end, have become rigid with frost, while that one in the middle, which is also the largest, is scorched by the burning heat of the sun. Two are habitable. Of these, that one in the south, men standing in which have their feet planted right opposite to yours, has no connection with your race." So this somewhat convoluted text is trying to convey the idea that the world is very hot at the equator, very cold at the poles, and in between there are habitable zones that are temperate. And if there, yes, it's basically a symmetric vision of the world with the idea that there's habitable land in the northern hemisphere and habitable land in the southern hemisphere. And this idea that there's habitable land in the southern hemisphere was elaborated upon by Macrobius in his commentary on the Dream of Scipio in the early 5th century. And there are maps that illustrate manuscripts of Macrobius's work. To our knowledge, these do not go back to the 5th century. So these are later graphic interpretations of what Macrobius writes. But we can see it's a very dramatic representation of this idea that there is a continental landmass in the southern hemisphere. And the image we see here, which is from the 11th century, clearly shows us that this is all based on this idea of symmetry. So these maps don't generally offer a lot of geographical detail. We do see the Mediterranean and the Red Sea helpfully indicated in red. So very vaguely, we have Europe on the upper left, Africa in the south, and Asia in the upper right. And then we have this equatorial ocean, which separates the northern landmass and the southern landmass, and then this southern continent, which has the same system of a frigid zone at the pole, a torrid zone at the equator, and a temperate zone that's habitable in between those two. And there are quite a number of these surviving Macrobian mappamundi. This is another one from the 11th century. Again, we have the Red Sea helpfully indicated in red. The Mediterranean is the largest geographical feature on the map. Again, the traditional continents have very strange shapes to fit this conception of the world. And then we have the equatorial ocean and the southern continent. And this conception of the world made it into print, as it were. So the two maps I just showed were manuscripts. This is a printed map from 1483 in an edition of Macrobius's commentary on the Dream of Scipio, where we see the same configuration of the world. Moving forward in time, this idea that there was a southern continent continued, and we see it represented here on Francesco Roselli's oval world map made in about 1508. This is a spectacularly hand-colored example, so it's a printed map. This is a hand-colored example at the Royal Geographical Society. And here is the southern continent, which, if we look closely, even has little symbols of cities on it. And one example of a southern continent that I'm going to focus on is that on Johann Schöner's terrestrial globe of 1515. So here we have a portrait of Schöner, who lived from 1477 to 1547. He was a polymath. He was an astronomer, a mathematician, a geographer, a cartographer, and a teacher. And here is his terrestrial globe of 1515. There are two surviving complete examples. This one is in Weimar. This example, it looks nice. It looks to be in good condition in this picture, but actually it's at some point in its history, it was in a bad state of preservation, and a lot of modification, well, attempted repairs were made that actually changed the geography of the globe. This one in Frankfurt is the other surviving complete exemplar of the globe. It's in much better condition. In addition to these two spherical exemplars, there are fragments of the gores of this globe, of the printed sheets of this globe, in the Library of Congress. Here is the New World on Schöner's globe. We can see South America right in front of us there. And at the bottom of the globe, we can see part of the southern continent, this hypothetical southern continent. And this depiction of the southern continent on Schöner's globe was an innovation. So one of Schöner's most important models by far in creating his globe was Martin Waldseemüller's world map of 1507. He followed it in many, many details, just to have a closer look at the southern continent on Schöner's globe. Here is Waldseemüller's 1507 map, and we can see that there is no sign of a southern continent on this map. It's also true that the map doesn't extend very far to the south, so one might wonder whether Waldseemüller believed that there was a southern continent but just didn't depict it on this map. But Waldseemüller also made globe gores, which we see here, basically the same geography as on his large world map, and there is no sign of a southern continent. And the globe gores, of course, all extend all the way to the South Pole. So the most important model for Johann Schoner in making his 1515 globe has no southern continent. Nor is there a southern continent on Martin Beckheim's globe of 1492, which is the oldest surviving terrestrial globe. We know there were earlier globes. We have textual records of them, but this is the early one that happens to survive. And as we can see, the South Pole is occupied by symbols of Nuremberg, which is where Martin Beckheim lived. There is no southern continent there. Here is the South Pole on the so-called Jagiellonian globe in the Jagiellonian University Museum in Krakow from about 1507. The hole in it is a relic of the fact that it was part of a very elaborate clockwork mechanism. But for our purposes, the important thing is that there is no southern continent depicted on this globe. Nor is there a southern continent on the Lenox globe in the New York Public Library, which was made in about 1510. So here is the southern continent on Johann Schoner's globe, and as we can see, it forms a ring. It's not a complete ring, but a ring of land around the South Pole with open water at the pole. And this is a very curious depiction for this completely hypothetical land. So the question naturally arises as to where this land came from. What were the ideas that inspired Schoner to place this hypothetical land here? We can see that we have the name Brasiliae Regio, the region of Brazil, in the southern continent. And so we can see that there's a little bit of confusion on Schoner's part. And this confusion relates to the origin of part of this southern ring continent on this globe. So fortunately, Schoner published a pamphlet to accompany this globe that explains some of the things about it. Unfortunately, it does not explain the southern continent in any detail at all. Just to zoom in here a little bit. Here is the title page of that pamphlet, the Luculentissima Quaedam Terrae Totius Descriptio, printed to accompany the globe. And there is a passage about Brasiliae Regio, the region of Brazil. And he says that the land was discovered by the Portuguese, that it is not distant from the Cape of Good Hope, and that it runs east and west. He also says that the inhabitants of the land wear untreated animal skins, use bows and arrows, have cassia and unusual birds, and abundant gold and silver. So clearly, he's at least partly describing Brazil. The fact that he says that it's not distant from the Cape of Good Hope is puzzling, and the fact that he says that it runs east and west, that part seems to apply to the southern continent, but the rest of it seems to apply to Brazil. So the source of both part of this southern continent and part of this confusion was this pamphlet, which was published just a year before Schoner made his globe, which is titled New Tidings Out of Brazil Land. And this pamphlet contains a very confusing passage. I'm about to read it to you. It's confusing. The fact that it's confusing is no fault of understanding on your part. It's just a very strange passage. But this strange passage, Schoner interpreted it as best he could, and it generated part of his southern continent. The passage says, "And when they had arrived in such climate or region, namely around 40 degrees of latitude south, they found Brazil with a cape, which is a point or place extending into the ocean. And they sailed around or past this very cape and found that the same gulf lies as Europe does, with the side lying west to east, that is, situated between sunrise or east and sunset or west. Then they saw land on the other side as well, when they had sailed a distance of 60 miles along the Cape in the same manner as when one travels toward the east and passes the Strait of Gibraltar and sees the land of the Berbers, which is in North Africa. And when they had come around the Cape, as stated, and sailed or traveled northwestward towards us, there arose so great a storm and also such a wind as they were unable to sail or travel further. It's a very confusing passage. Basically, the passage seems to be saying something about a strait in the southern part of Brazil. And that's exactly what Schoner depicts. There's a strait of land between the southern tip of South America and this southern ring continent. And this aspect of the globe has occasioned a lot of discussion. How could Schoner possibly depict the Strait of Magellan before its discovery? Well, the answer was he was just trying to interpret this very strange passage in this pamphlet about Brazil. So that pamphlet explains part of what we see here, part of this southern continent. It explains the part that's to the south of South America and that has this name Brasilia Regio in it, but that doesn't explain the rest of it. And if we zoom in on the rest of it, we can see that it has very specific geography. It has two lakes surrounded by mountains, joined by an immensely long river. So granted, one thinks that there has to be a southern continent, perhaps out of ideas of symmetry or balance between the northern and southern hemispheres. How does one get the idea that it has such specific, well, not just geography, but hydrography, these two lakes surrounded by mountains with an enormously long river joining them? To answer this question, we will have to go back to one of the great geographical mysteries of classical antiquity, which is the problem of the flooding of the Nile. So the mystery was, why does the Nile flood in the summer when there is no rain? How is it possible that this enormous river can have this very, very dramatic flooding precisely in the season when there is no rain? And we can get some idea of how dramatic the flooding is from a couple of historical photographs, this one from the 1930s, this one from 1964. This was a great mystery. And one of the proposed solutions to this mystery was suggested by a Roman geographer, Pomponius Mela, who writes, "But if there is another world," in this case meaning a southern continent, "and there are antichthonies opposite us across the equator, then even this would not be far removed from the truth that the river, the Nile, has its source in those lands, whence it penetrates beneath the seas in a hidden channel, then emerges again in our lands, and it is for this reason that it swells at the summer solstice, because it is then winter at its source." So Pomponius Mela is suggesting that the Nile floods in the summer because it has its source in the southern hemisphere, where the seasons are the opposite. And so when it floods in Egypt in the summer, it's the winter at its source. And we don't have any map that goes back to the times of Pomponius Mela. This is a 17th century attempt to interpret what Pomponius Mela says about the configuration of the world. And it's worth a look. So just to orient ourselves, we have Europe, Asia, Africa, and then this very prominent southern continent. Here we have the Nile in two parts. If we zoom in, first we have the Nile in Africa, and then we have the source of the Nile in the other world, and that's reading the Latin words on the map. And the mountains of the moon, the traditional source of the Nile are here located not in Africa, but in the southern continent. So this is a radical reconfiguration of the traditional geography of the Nile to fit with this hypothesis by Pomponius Mela that the Nile floods in the summer when there's no rain because it has its source in the southern hemisphere, where the seasons are the opposite. And so it's flooding in the summer in the northern hemisphere when it's the winter in the southern hemisphere. And if we go back to Schoner's globe, we can see that the mountains of the moon, the traditional source of the Nile, are depicted in Africa, where we would expect them. It's worth pointing out that one of the two lakes surrounded by mountains is directly south of the mountains of the moon. So this tends to confirm that there's some connection between this very curious geography or hydrography in the southern continent, these two huge lakes surrounded by mountains, connected by a long river, and the Nile. We can further confirm this by looking at the depiction of the Nile in some medieval mappamundi. So this is the famous Hereford mappamundi, which was made in about 1300. I've rotated it to put north at the top. So we have the Mediterranean at the left. The Red Sea is helpfully indicated in red. Here is the Nile, but the Nile has an additional branch, which is further to the south, basically at the southern edge of Africa. And if we zoom in, we can see that the western branch of the Nile, as it's called, is basically a very long river running east to west that joins two lakes, very similar to what we have in Schoner's southern continent. And we can see a similar configuration of the Nile in some other medieval mappamundi. This is the so-called Sali mappamundi, made in about 1100. Again, I've rotated the map to put north at the top. And if we zoom in on southern Africa, we again have this so-called western branch of the Nile, which is really might make more sense to call it the southern branch, which is a very long river running east to west that joins two lakes together. We can see a very similar configuration here, where there's much less emphasis on the two lakes at the end of this long river running east and west, but there it is in the southern part of Africa. And we can also see several maps in which lakes surrounded by mountains are associated with the Nile. So here we have the famous Putinger map made in about 1200 that basically shows the road network of the Roman Empire. But it also depicts the Nile. So there we have the Nile Delta and the Nile River itself, and the source of the Nile is indicated as a lake surrounded by mountains, which we see here. This is one of the mappamundi that illustrate Beatus of Liébana's commentary on the Apocalypse. This one was made in the 11th century. Again, I've rotated it to put north at the top. And if we zoom in on Africa, we can see the Nile. And again, we have a lake connected to the Nile that is surrounded by mountains. And this is a map made in about 1506. The original has been destroyed, but by good fortune, a hand-painted facsimile of it was made before it was destroyed. And here we have the Nile and the western branch of the Nile. And if we zoom in, again, we see that there's a lake surrounded by mountains associated with the Nile. So if we go back to Schoner's globe, what he's done is really quite remarkable. So he evidently believed this hypothesis by the Roman geographer Pomponius Mela that the Nile floods in the summer because it has its source in the other hemisphere, and specifically in a landmass in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so that means there has to be a southern continent. And then he borrowed a medieval depiction of this branch of the Nile that is conceived of as this very long river flowing east to west, joining two lakes surrounded by mountains, and placed that in his southern continent. So we have a Renaissance cartographer influenced by a classical theory about the Nile, and then borrowing from a medieval map to complete this picture of the River Nile and its source in the southern continent. This depiction by Schoner was copied on the so-called Green Globe, which is at the National Library of France. Here it is. If we rotate the globe to look at its southern continent, we can see that the overall configuration is very similar to what we saw on Schoner's globe. And in particular, just to the south of Africa, we have one of the lakes surrounded by mountains, and this very long river joining that lake to another lake. So a contemporary copy of Schoner's depiction of this elaborate explanation, a sort of cartographic explanation of why the Nile floods in the summer. I want to look at some other instances of this so-called southern ring continent, this ring of land around the South Pole with open water at the pole itself. And we'll look next at one example of this on a world map painted in about 1530, added to a manuscript of Ptolemy's geography that had been created around the middle of the 15th century, so a few decades earlier. And we can see that this map also has this ring of land in the south, this southern continent with open water at the South Pole. If we look closely at this continent, going from west to east, we can see that it's full of place names, which is very interesting because it's twice labeled terra incognita, unknown land. Here, moving a bit to the east, we can see that there are 6 named cities in this southern continent. We have this very interesting peninsula jutting to the northeast, which we'll come back to in a moment. Again, many, many place names and inscriptions in this supposedly unknown land. And then here's the easternmost part of the continent. So if we return to this peninsula that juts to the northeast, again, as I just mentioned, it's full of inscriptions. And the source of these inscriptions in this part of the map, in this peninsula, is very surprising. They come from Columbus's 4th voyage. In his 4th voyage, when he was exploring the mainland, he was in Central America, as this map shows us in his 4th voyage from 1502 to 1504. So if we look at the place names and inscriptions in this peninsula, moving from south to north, we see Porto Seguro, so the secure port. This is quite a generic name. It does occur in Columbus's account of his 4th voyage, but it is not really very good evidence that it comes from Columbus's 4th voyage because it is a generic name. The Rio Belém, the Bethlehem River, this is mentioned in Columbus's account of his 4th voyage, but again, it's a reasonably generic name. Corabaro, the name of this bay, this is not a generic name, and it does occur in Columbus's fourth voyage. So we're now starting to get some strong evidence that what we're seeing here is somehow, in some strange way, connected with Columbus's fourth voyage. The Mount of St. Christopher, again, we're back to a pretty generic name, but Columbus does mention a mountain of St. Christopher in his account of his fourth voyage. We have this Italian text which translates as, in this Gulf Corabaro, so referring to the bay below, worms are born which bore through ships. So referring to shipworms, and Columbus on his fourth voyage had huge problems with shipworms. And then the Rio de Pino, the River of the Pine, in the northern part of this peninsula. So all of these place names and inscriptions are mirrored in Columbus's fourth voyage. And again, a few of them are rather generic, but taken all together, and particularly the specific name Corabaro and the reference to shipworms, it's very strong evidence, as bizarre as it seems, that this information does come from Columbus's fourth voyage. So the question is, what on earth is information about Columbus's fourth voyage doing on this peninsula in the southern part of the Indian Ocean, when in fact it refers to Columbus was sailing on the coast of Central America? Well, as we'll see in a minute, there was considerable confusion about where the new discoveries were actually located and what lands they were connected to. So if we go back to Rosselli's map of 1508, he also indicates the locations of place names from Columbus's fourth voyage. He puts them on the coast of Asia. And this, of course, reflects Columbus's belief that he was on the coasts of Asia. That was always his belief throughout his life, that these lands he had reached were some sort of outlying region of Asia. And Rosselli, in making his 1508 map, reflects that belief. But still, we have the problem of, why are these place names from the fourth voyage of Columbus so far to the south in the Indian Ocean? Well, it turns out that there are some other globes and maps that place a land that seems to be connected with the New World in the southern Indian Ocean. So this is the Jagiellonian globe, which I showed earlier. It's, as you see, tiny, just 3 inches in diameter. So here is South America. And if we turn the globe around, here is the Indian Ocean. And in the southern Indian Ocean, there's this large island, which has an inscription on it, America Newly Discovered. So basically, there's 2 Americas on this globe. There's South America, where we expect it to be, and this island in the southern Indian Ocean, which is in exactly the same position as the peninsula on the Vatican map. The Vatican map, the peninsula on the Vatican map has place names from Columbus's fourth voyage. This island has the name America, so there's some connection between them. Just a closer look at this large island with the inscription America Newly Discovered on it. So this island on the Jagiellonian globe stretches to the northeast, the same way the peninsula on the Vatican map does. And it reaches towards another peninsula that sort of juts down towards it, so that they almost join. Let's have a quick look at the Hunt-Lennox globe in the New York Public Library from 1510. Here is its depiction of South America and Cuba. And here is the Indian Ocean. It also has this large island in the same position, in this case not labeled America, but that stretches to the northeast and stretches towards this peninsula that comes down southward. Pietro Coppo's world map of 1524, just to orient ourselves a little bit, here's South America, Africa, has this large island in the Indian Ocean in the same position as the peninsula on the Vatican map and as the islands on the Jagiellonian globe and the New York Public Library Hunt Lennox globe. If we compare the Vatican map and the Jagiellonian globe a little bit more closely, the northern tip of both the island on the globe below and the peninsula on the Vatican map above reach just about to the Tropic of Capricorn. So they have the same orientation, they're in the same position. But the question remains, how did this island that somehow represents the New World end up in the southern Indian Ocean, south of the Tropic of Capricorn? And the answer is, I believe, in a pamphlet published by Martin Waldseemüller and his colleague Matthias Ringmann, published to accompany Waldseemüller's 1507 world map. So the title is the Cosmographiae Introductio, or Introduction to Cosmography. And in that work, Waldseemüller and Ringmann write, in the sixth climate toward the Antarctic are located the farthest part of Africa, recently discovered, the islands of Zanzibar, the Lesser Java, and Sula, and the fourth part of the Earth, which, because Amerigo discovered it, we may call it Amerigae, the land of Amerigo, so to speak, or America. So this states in the very clearest possible way that this new discovery by Amerigo Vespucci is down towards the Antarctic. So again, in the early 16th century, it was very difficult to understand what exactly these new discoveries were, where exactly they were located, and what their connection was to known lands such as Asia. And so what we're seeing here is part of that confusion in understanding what these new discoveries were exactly. So that this peninsula, which again has inscriptions related to Columbus's fourth voyage, which really should be in Central America, here in accordance with that passage in the Cosmographiae Introductio, is far to the south in the Indian Ocean, far south of the equator and even south of the Tropic of Capricorn. So a couple of other of these southern ring continents, one is on Michel Tramezzino's world map of 1554, which is in two hemispheres. So here's the eastern hemisphere. And we can see that there's this ring of land around the South Pole with open water at the pole. And for some reason, the Western Hemisphere is reluctant to show itself, but there it is with the southern continent. In this case, again, there's an opening in the southern continent. And in trying to interpret Tramezzino's map, so he offers no explanation of this continent, unfortunately, I think we're to go back to an idea that comes from Macrobius again, which is that there's abundant water at the poles. Because the poles are cold, the idea was that water vapor would condense there. So there would be abundant water at the poles. And then also, I believe we're to see the influence of some ideas of Roger Bacon, the English philosopher, in his Opus Maius from the 13th century. And Bacon talks about a flow of water between the poles. So this diagram depicts the South Pole at the left, the North Pole at the right. And he says that on the one side, we have the beginning of India, on the other side, the beginning of Spain. So let me rotate this. So he's talking about a flow of water between the two poles, between Europe and Asia, basically. And if we look at Tramezzino's globe, it certainly seems to be configured so as to facilitate such a flow. There's an opening within this southern ring continent that would enable this flow. And the coasts between Asia and North America seemed, again, designed to facilitate this flow. And for example, there is no prominent island of Japan. There's really nothing. There's a small island there, but nothing that would seriously impede this flow. And we can confirm that this world map is based on Roger Bacon's ideas about this flow of water between the poles from its projection. So the fact that the latitudes are equidistant, this is precisely the projection for a world map recommended by Roger Bacon. So this confirms a connection between this world map and Roger Bacon, and thus confirms that this map is based on this theory of abundant moisture at the poles and a flow of water between the two poles. And finally, we'll look quickly at Urbano Monti's manuscript world map of 1587, which of course is in the Rumsey Center at Stanford. I suspect most of us are familiar with it. And so it's on 60 sheets, which when assembled, or in this case, digitally assembled, form a world map more than 3 meters in diameter. Just to orient ourselves a bit, North America, South America, Africa, Asia. Here's the North Pole, so it's a polar projection. The Arctic Circle, the equator, and the 8 principal islands that make up the southern continent. And again, we have a ring of land around the South Pole. So the North Pole is at the center of the map. The South Pole is this point distributed to a circle at the outer edge of a map. And we have, so this ring of 8 islands around the South Pole. And then outside of that, we have portraits of kings and many descriptive texts at the very southern edge of the map. And then information about winds, climatic zones, solstices, and eclipses. Here we have the prime meridian and the tidal cartouche and Monti's coat of arms.
We're just going to check in, chat, because we're right around time.
Yeah, I'm finishing up.
Thank you.
So here is the southern continent. And if we ask about the source of this southern continent, I think it goes back to the idea of symmetry that I talked about earlier. So if we zoom in on the northern polar regions on Monti's map, we can see that it consists of 4 islands that form a ring around the North Pole with these gaps between the islands where the water flows in. So it's very similar to what we have around the South Pole. At the North Pole, we have this ring of 4 islands. South Pole, we have a ring of 8 islands. So Monti's southern continent seems based on an idea of symmetry. And the source of Monti's depiction of the North Pole with these 4 islands that form a ring goes back to Gerard Mercator's depiction of the northern polar regions and earlier works that we won't get into right now. So to conclude, we've seen a few different versions, if you will, of this idea that there is a ring of land around the South Pole with open water at the pole. And it's interesting how different the reasons for this depiction seem to be on these various maps. It doesn't seem that there was a chain of influence between them. So in Schoner's case, it was this pamphlet about this Portuguese voyage combined with his ideas about why the Nile floods in the summer. In the Vatican map, at least part of the southern ring continent comes from this idea that America was located in the far south. Here, which we also saw on the Jagiellonian globe. And in Tramezzino's map, the southern continent stems from this idea that goes back to Roger Bacon of a flow between the two poles, which we see facilitated here. I'm not sure why the image disappeared. And finally, in Urbano Monte's world map of 1587, we go back to the idea of symmetry. So there's a ring of islands around the North Pole, and there's also a ring of islands around the South Pole on Monte's map. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chet. That was amazing. So much wonderful detail. So great to see all of those amazing 16th century maps and globes. And I loved how you were comparing each one and showing how there was almost like a narrative between them and a discussion in a way. That was just fantastic. If you'll stop your screen share for us, I'd love to give people an opportunity to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
Please feel free to unmute and start chatting. Is your hand up, Ron?
Yeah, it is. So
all right, I'll start with you.
Chet, that was fantastic detective work, putting those pieces together. And I wanted to add that the concept of open water at the poles persisted well into the 19th century. Last year, the year before, we had Hampton Sides give a presentation here at the California Map Society. And his book, In the Kingdom of Ice, is about the 19th century U.S. Navy expedition to determine whether there was open water at the North Pole. So this is amazing history. And my understanding was that they thought there was open water at the poles because the Earth was not round, but more shaped like a pin cushion, and the distance from the center of the Earth to the poles was less than from the center of the Earth to the equator. So it might be warmer paradoxically at the poles. But I loved your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I see that we have a hand up from Emily, Ken, Mark, and Graham. So I'll get through those. Emily, feel free.
Hi, Chet. It's great to see you again. Your presentations are always amazing. You made these really, really fascinating connections between Columbus's fourth voyage and the flooding of the Nile, and of course, the Green Continent. And I just love to better understand your research process. How did you even begin to see all those connections? And did you ever go on like a sort of false trail? And yeah, I'd just love to hear all about that process.
Well, I should say that the map at the Vatican that has that peninsula jutting up, that was the map that really got me interested in the history of cartography. I saw it at the Vatican museums, and I was intrigued by the fact, first, that the southern continent was labeled terra incognita and yet was full of place names, and yet also had this strange shape. So that was my starting point. And then in investigating further, I quickly found Schoner's globe. And yeah, what was my research process? I think really is just to see as many maps as possible. So one thing I'm very fond of is keeping in mind books that have lots and lots and lots of reproductions of maps, and just flipping through them and seeing as many as I possibly can. And that's how I found the other related examples. So I guess a short answer is brute force. But it did take a while to understand what was going on with Schoner's globe. The two lakes with the river joining them immediately attracted my attention. And it took quite a bit of researching first to get this idea that it could be Pomponius Mela's idea about the Nile, and then to make the connection with the medieval Mappa Mundi. This project did take a while.
Fabulous. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Thurber.
Yes, I have a question, if I can interrupt.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Mark, you're muted.
Mark, you're muted. Mark.
Sorry. I lowered
We're
my
going to go
hand.
to Mark, Graham, Ken, then Kate for now.
Okay, no, sorry about that. No, that combination of the terra incognita with all the place names made me wonder more generally about depiction of uncertainty on maps when great parts of it were kind of unknown. And because that Vatican map, I mean, like if you look at the degree of detail and all that, it looks the same for kind of the known parts and the unknown parts. But does that terra incognita, was that sort of telling everybody, hey, I'm kind of really riffing here on all these names? And so, just in general, how was that communicated? And did people just implicitly know that, oh, well, these parts are kind of, we're sort of doing our best and these parts we know? Or
the question of uncertainty on maps and how it's depicted is very interesting. And there was a conference on precisely that subject. I'm trying to think, was it not last year, but the year before? And I've been working on a paper about depictions of uncertainty on maps that should be published, I hope, this year. Yeah, so how are we to interpret the fact that it says terra incognita and there are all these place names? I guess the short answer is I'm not sure. In writing about the map, I studied all the place names in the southern continent, not just the ones in that peninsula that come from Columbus's fourth voyage, but I couldn't find any pattern as to where the others came from. So the ones on the peninsula clearly come from Columbus's fourth voyage. The others, it seemed like they were just grabbed from, they were borrowed, but borrowed from all different places. So it's a curious method of composition. I mean, a lot of maps are made by combining information from different sources, but this is more combining disinformation, if you will.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to the paper. Yeah.
Courtney.
Graham, I'm going to toss it to you now.
Oh, thank you. Quick question. Okay, do you think the placement of American, there's American place names in what looks like the southern part of the Indian Ocean to us, was any connection to the belief that when you sail west from Spain, you hit India?
Yeah, so the passage in the Cosmographia Introductio clearly indicates that America is very far to the south, but how it ended up in the southern Indian Ocean is a mystery to me. And so clearly America was a land that you could reach by sailing west from Europe, but how it was decided to locate that land in the southern Indian Ocean, I couldn't get to the bottom of that one. So
makes sense.
Mysteries still remain.
Yep.
Fabulous. Ken, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation, Chad. Really great. I'm going to kind of veer it towards a little bit more of my interest, which is that Waldseemüller and Schöner were both operating roughly within the same 50-year span, almost 25-year span, and yet there's a huge difference in the accuracy that they show of the shape of the African continent. I'm just fascinated by that. I think lots of people know that Gastaldi was really the first, and the Italian school really the first to come up with an accurate shape of Africa or close to that. How did you find out about Schöner exactly? Because I'd never heard of him before.
How did I find out about Schöner? I guess it was because the Library of Congress has what's called the Schöner Sammelband. Sammelband is a manuscript, a book that combines several things in it. And the only reason we have the surviving copies of Waldseemüller's 1507 map and Waldseemüller's 1516 Carta Marina is that Schöner preserved them in this book. The individual sheets he put in this book with the explicit intention to preserve them for posterity. It's really quite amazing. So when I started working on Waldseemüller, I very quickly encountered Schöner's name because he was the one who preserved the maps for us. And then also curiously, in the binding of that SAML band were fragments of the printed gores of Schoner's globe. And let me add that with regard to the shape of Africa, on Waldseemüller's 1507 map, it's quite Ptolemaic, particularly North Africa. But on Waldseemüller's Carta Marina 1516, made 9 years later, it's much, let's say, less Ptolemaic and more accurate thus. Yes, and yeah.
But it looks like Schoner was paying attention to the Italian school, to what was going on there, and yet still looking back at medieval maps. That's
Yes.
wild. That's really
It
interesting.
is. It is wild.
Next, we have Kate Hunter.
Hi, Chet. That was great. Thank
Okay.
you very much. My question goes back to the Waldseemüller passage you highlighted from his Introductio. And I'm wondering if he said what he said there about implying and allowing other people, other cartographers, map makers, to interpret that America, the fourth part of the world, should be found so far south and roughly in the Indian Ocean. Why he didn't depict that in his own map of the same time and his own globe gores of the same time. In fact, what he depicted was far more accurate than what he said he believed.
Right. What I suspect, and I can't be certain about this, is that he was really trying to convey the fact that Amerigo Vespucci had sailed very far to the south, which is true, or is thought to be true, of one of Vespucci's voyages. I forget which one, and how somehow that got mixed up with using Amerigo Vespucci's name for the New World. It's really just a guess, because you're right, it doesn't make sense. But that's the only explanation I can think of for that confusion.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Chet. We are a little over our time, but I know there's so many more questions that people might have for you. Thank you again so much for everybody who presented today. It's been just such a delight and so informative. Hold on. My son is awake and having breakfast. Anyway, thank you guys again. Wonderful conference. We look forward to seeing everyone at our future events. Keep a date for June 29th at the Rumsey Center. We also have some informal map shares happening online and in person. Check out our website, californiamapsociety.org, to learn more about those and register. I'll turn it over to Ron right now. Thanks again.
Just to say one more time, Courtney, thank you for arranging a fascinating program. Thanks to the speakers. We'll see you all either at 1 o'clock or on June 29th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Chet.
Thank you, Tom.
Chad, I still have your autograph. Oh, he missed it.
He just left. He just left. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
Oh, Courtney, you're muted if you're trying to say something. All right. I think I'm going to sign off, which means I think the meeting's going to end. But
Thank
nice
you
to
so
see
much,
you
Tom.
all.
Sorry, I was just dealing with some stuff for my son. You guys are amazing. Such a delight. Tom, as always, we are continuously in your debt.
No. This was great. This was wonderful. It was a great event. Good job, Courtney.
All right. You guys are
Thanks so much.
fantastic. See you next time.
I
All right.
can't come to the informal map share. I'm getting lunch with a friend, but wish
Come
I
to the
could.
next one anytime.
Courtney, is something happening at 1? Is there?
Yeah, it's the informal map share. You're CC'd on the email.
Where is that happening?
I'm hosting it on a different Zoom because I didn't want to put you out for the rest of the afternoon.
Oh, I
Did you
didn't know
get
that
the
was.
email? It probably went to your personal email. Do you want me to send it to your work?
I just need to know the
Yeah,
link.
here, I'll put it in the chat. Don't go anywhere.
Can you? Okay.
There you go. But I got to run Connor to an appointment.
Yep.
So I'm going to hopefully get Ron on to be co-host because this one a little longer than planned. And
It's planned for an hour.
yeah, I mean, just about 10 people signed up.
Okay.
Oh,
All
can you
right.
start recording?
I'm gonna do it right now.
Thank you. And thank you so much for posting that.